No lie.
Thank you.
I'll wait to put it in the calendar.
Okay.
Today is Monday, May 3rd, 2021, and we will call the meeting to order at 5:34 p.m. and begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Start our introductions with Ms. Paquette.
Yes, okay, Assistant Superintendent.
Stamen, Ward 1.
Belgian physical at 2.
Kieran Majoris Collins, Ward 3.
Jake Legal, Superintendent.
Megan Parks at large.
Tanya Whitlow, Ward 4. Linnea Hawkins, Ward 5.
Ron Blackman, Ward 6.
Paul Vogler, Ward 7.
Alicia Wren, City Council Representative.
All votes tonight start with Ward 2, I believe, correct? Yes. Thank you. Agenda item number 3 is the COVID-19 update.
I'm sure you've seen my letters both late last week and to start off the week this week. We've had numerous things come up. A little higher in frequency still. That bubble that was kind of creeping up on us the last few weeks has remained, I would say, up. One thing that's really saving us is adults that are vaccinated. The fact that they are allowed to remain at work, not trying to teach from home when they are close contacts. So we've been following those rules. We've also been looking into what they call pool testing, which is where swabs can actually be taken in a small grouping of people, and it all goes in the same pool and gets shipped out for testing. If you've done an individual COVID swab and you've seen it go in the tube, it's kind of like that, but bigger. And there's a process which you put it out, kids can swab themselves and they'll go put it in and sanitize after. And what that may allow for people to do is have some sense of some asymptomatic people that might pop up in places. We're also looking at exploring it just for procedural awareness and know-how, if you will, this spring, potentially at the high school on a couple of Fridays so that we have results before the Monday. And looking at exploring it for the summer use, for different summer programming from summer school at the high school, potentially, and also athletic groupings, so that if you have this cycle, we can build in how does it work and whatnot. This reminds me of when we started the Binex testing a while back. We didn't know how it would go, but we figured we would try it so we at least know the logistics. So we're exploring that. There's some information out there that'll be available as soon as next week. So we've connected with the folks that are providing that. And we'll see if we have it. Again, we're looking to do it once or twice at the high school only in a couple of small sections to try it, to see how it works. And then looking at opportunities in the summer to make sure we don't have spreading or other events. There's not a lot of data around the pool sampling. Well, I shouldn't say there's a lot of data, but there's not a lot of data that it might be as beneficial as some might think it is in a school-like setting. And so we're looking at exploring it, leaving no tools unused if at all possible. But I'm not making any promises. We just want to explore it and see if it's something that might help us in the future. And by in the future, I'll connect that to superintendents in the region and the state have filed a letter with the Department of Education, with the governor, asking for some push on the guidelines and to get things opened up for the fall. And asking for those guidelines well in advance of what we had last year of the end of July, so that we can plan accordingly and do the work that we need to do. And so there's some push there, and we'll see what happens. There have been some guideline changes for indoor and outdoor activities, and there's also that paired with those who are vaccinated, those who are not. I just want to remind people that we are schools, and as long as you are in a school, the guidelines for masking and distancing remain, even if you have been vaccinated. And there are other things like outdoor activities. If you have an outdoor classroom, if you have kids on the playground, and so just so you're aware, we still intend to have students masking unless they're eating something while they're in the school setting. There may be situations in which the students can really spread out outside for what I consider to be light activity, not mingling with each other. that they could remove their masks. The language around schools is different than the language around athletic competitions, which is different than language around general public. And so I work to try to clarify that as much as I can for people. Our student numbers continue to rise. We're seeing a lot of whole house or whole family contacts that are contracting and testing positive. Some of them as much as a week later or 10 days later, hence the 10-day quarantine. So I just, as a word to the public, that if someone in the home is showing symptoms, it may be worth keeping the other children home too until you know exactly what's going on. I would say that probably 4 classrooms full of students who were identified as close contacts today were in connection to students who were still coming to school when their siblings had symptoms and then tested positive, and then it spread throughout. It can be challenging for a family. I don't want families to feel that. It can be challenging because you have one student at home with a sore throat, not feeling so great, and the other students go to school. And then you decide not to take the risk, so you have to do a COVID test, and you find out they were positive. All the other kids went to school that day, and then they, within a 24, 48-hour window, are often coming down with those symptoms and testing positive too. And the way that rule works is whenever the test is taken, we go back 2 full days for the CDC. So any close contacts that happen are in fact close contacts. The reason I say that is today's letter, which had a litany of things that keep me busy during the day, those are all from today. And those are oftentimes because of people who were tested on Thursday or Friday, and they're just getting the results or finding the messaging about the results now. Or it's getting relayed to the school because of the weekend it pops up on Monday. So kind of transition that I think when we're still having this volume, but we're also able to stay open, looking at continuing to use the update letters that have multiple schools and multiple situations on it so people can just see what's going on. If we have a closure of any kind, I'll do a letter dedicated to that. So people know that that's specific to that. Schools are doing a phenomenal job communicating. Our nurses have been amazing. Our teachers have been amazing. So it's really a considered effort. We're about 5 weeks left of school right now. And again, looking like we're going to continue with the hybrid model. I don't anticipate a change in the guidelines, so much so that it would change our approach to schools. We'll continue on. We do have the next meeting around logistics on May 10th at 5 p.m. and I invite parents to participate in that as well as our LEA staff. So we look forward to continuing to think about what are the other things we can do depending on what the guidelines are as we look to the fall or to the fall.
Mr. Majeris-Collins.
Are we doing anything in terms of, I mean, your letter makes mention of staff members who are vaccinated, so obviously we have some sense of who's getting vaccinated, but we have a metric yet in terms of percentage of staff that have been vaccinated.
All I've seen from kind of HR or human resources notices that come to us is if we are asking for it, we have to store it properly as a medical record. If we're not asking for it, we're not obligated to acquire it or store it.
Right.
You tried to reference, I don't know if you want to add to that, Kim, or if that's accurate.
That is accurate, and we're not currently.
I mean, I guess I'd be of the mindset that would be helpful information, in part because, you know, any reopening plan for the fall, it has a more robust look to it than what we've seen the last year is going to be heavily dependent upon having a vaccinated staff and hopefully a vaccinated student body too. And without that information, it's going to be hard to sort of make those kind of plans. But I think that would be probably well worth. Yeah.
So on that same subject, you mentioned that teachers who have been vaccinated are no longer have to quarantine. So is that based on like self-reporting now, or?
Essentially, we figure out the close contacts and then we reach out to them and say, you were a close contact because of this child at this time and this duration. You know, do you have any information you want to share with us about being vaccinated? And if they say, yes, I've been vaccinated, and my 2 weeks has gone by, then according to CDC rule, they're able to stay in the workplace.
Do they have to show their records and put it in the file when they say that they're vaccinated?
We've been asking them to verify with us, but we're taking their word for it. We're not gathering that medical record.
And do you
We don't currently store medical records for staff, so there's some obligations around it, and how long you have to keep it, and how it has to be stored in another layer of confidentiality and privacy.
So realistically, and then I'm not saying this is happening or this would happen, but a teacher could say that they're vaccinated, they're not, and then they're putting their classroom at risk, right? Like that could happen. And I'm not, and I'm not saying that teachers should have to tell us, you know, that's a medical thing, but it seems like a catch-22, I guess.
Yeah. And I know that we still have teachers that are actively getting vaccinated. In fact, some of the situations from today, I think there were 2 or 3 teachers that haven't quite reached that 2-week window, but they've been there. So people are still getting them.
Right.
And I know there's plenty in the area for my medical update last Tuesday.
Ms. Wright?
It's interesting to hear that there are requirements about medical records for possible employees. How can we keep that information safe for our students? And could that be extended to our employees?
I mean, I think the rules are a little different for employees versus students. But I would rely on Kim to help me track that down.
I think it's going to be increasingly evident that we might need to store that. Or not that we're mandating everyone to do this thing, but to have an understanding of who has done the thing.
I guess before I want to jump into the realm of storing that medically, I want to do some more analysis on what's the benefit to us as a school for knowing. And I get some of the pieces of it. There's also the caveat of people saying, that's my right, I don't even want to tell you. That's my right, I'm choosing not to. I think from a keeping schools open 5 days a week is going to get closer to that, or hopefully be there in the fall, at least in my opinion. That we will be at a threshold. I am encouraging people to get vaccinated. It's their choice. I can tell you already 30 situations that have popped up for me in my own world where being already vaccinated took a lot of stress off of the situation. And, you know, every situation that pops up and then a week or 10 days passes and it's not something I have to worry too much about. I think it's just better. And so I'm encouraging everyone to get vaccinated. I've also reached out, or as part of our medical conversations, I've shared with them our local medical collaborations or partners. I've said to them that if the student vaccines become available, I'm interested in how we can help facilitate that happening for kids. And again, if parents wish, and we'll sign off and all of that. But there's talks now of going 12 plus at some point. We may have to do vaccination clinics before the school year starts, you know, and start playing it out backwards. You know, if it's a month and then 2 weeks, so 6 weeks out, we're mid-July, we might have vaccine clinics here, if that's feasible.
Mr. Adair-Collins?
Yeah, so I guess a couple of points. Number one, I would say that we do have a population of students right now who are eligible to be vaccinated. It's 16 and up, so that's I think catching every senior and an awful lot of juniors. So if we're thinking about potentially doing, you know, as the initial trials are coming back really positive, with strong, robust protection and no meaningful side effects for the adult vaccines on the 12 to 15 population. If we think that we're going to be potentially doing student vaccination clinics, it might be worth exploring doing that for 16 and 17-year-old students right now. But I also, I guess, would say that, you know, on the subject of storing the medical information and the need for it, I think Member Whitlow has a you know, valid point, and that everything gets a lot easier if we are able to say, you know, okay, these are the staff members who were potentially exposed. We check them against our database. You know, 5 of the 7 were vaccinated. We have their records. They don't have to quarantine. The other people have to quarantine. And you just take the sort of, you know, did you get vaccinated part entirely out of the equation, because then we don't have to guess, we just can know. And I think that that also potentially starts to create an incentive to get vaccinated. Yeah, you don't have to get vaccinated necessarily. You don't have to tell us whether or not you're vaccinated. If you haven't told us that, then our presumption is you aren't. And we're going to proceed accordingly when it comes to contact tracing. I think that that's a reasonable way of going about it, and potentially a small nudge towards staff members who haven't vaccinated yet, going ahead and doing it. So I really think that this is something we're probably going to have to do and encourage the administration to move in that direction.
Any other, Mr. Potter?
So Jake, when children come to school, right, there's a requirement of children on a litmus of different shots and vaccinations to come to the school, to be in the school, to be present with others. But there's no requirement of employees for the same thing while they're coming to the same school.
I mean, immunizations, is that a list that we track? As far as the adults are concerned for staff?
I'm just wondering if it's a conversation that we need to maybe reach, given where we are in today's world.
There are
We're
some
not talking about
organizations.
the measles, we're not talking about the other tetanus and all the rest of them, you know, but now we're dealing with something that shut the world down. So I guess if we're gonna have that conversation, now might be the time. And see if there's, you know, teachers union, et cetera, employees union, if there's an openness to it. I think at least have the discussion. Kind of surprised me. I don't understand why the requirement on one, but like to have employees that don't. So it's like, I can't connect that.
Yeah, I know some organizations have mandated it, but everything I've seen, and I could be wrong because they're popping up every day, I believe they've all been private organizations. I've not seen any public sector organizations required. I don't know if there'll be more language on that from a legal perspective anytime soon, but I can explore it.
Also important to remember when we're discussing vaccinating even just the 16 and 17-year-olds right now, that only one of the 3 approved vaccines kids are eligible for. So that comes to the issue of availability, and we have enough of a supply with the one of the 3. Pfizer. Kieran, sorry, Mr. Madrid.
Well, I mean, I share my province concern, and I also would point out that one of the reasons we don't have to ensure that staff members have been vaccinated for measles is because I think that could be wrong, but I feel like going to school is a prerequisite to working in a school. And we've had those vaccines for a while. So if you're going to come work for Lewiston Public Schools, it means you at some point went to school and you got your vaccines then. The difference here is that this is a new vaccine. So it wouldn't have been available when our staff members were going to school. And so they wouldn't have had it as part of their, I mean, you can't go to college without having a battery of vaccines. You can't go to high school. You can't go to, elementary school. But I think that especially as long as we're talking about a situation where kids are not eligible for this vaccine, then we really have an obligation and a duty to make sure that everybody else in the building who's serving the kids is going to be both personally protected, but also as minimal a vector of transmission to those kids as possible, with responsibility to take care of them. Maybe it gets a little bit less crucial if you're talking about a situation where all the kids are also eligible, but we're a ways off from having, pre-K and kindergartners be eligible. They're just starting very preliminary trials on that stuff. And we're not going to have those results back in time for the fall. So it seems as though, going down the path and saying it and exploring that as an option, just because of the fact that we have adults who are eligible to take it and kids are not. And we got to protect that.
student representatives are not here tonight. Agenda item number 5 is the consent agenda. Are there any members of the consent agenda that members would like removed? Seeing none, the consent agenda is adopted. Agenda item number 6, public input. Members of the public may address the school committee for up to 3 minutes on non-agenda items now and non-agenda items later. Comments that pertain to staff, personal matters, or student issues should be directed to the superintendent or the appropriate staff member of Lewiston Public Schools. Public comments shall be directed to the school committee and be brief, not repetitive, and related to the matter at hand. Before starting, please state your name, address, or affiliation to Lewiston Public Schools.
Hello, good evening. My name is Jay Rich. I'm an ELL teacher at McMahon Elementary School. I'm also an active member and chair of the LEA Government Relations Committee, as well as a taxpayer for the city of Lewiston. I'm here tonight to address agenda item number 7, quote, to receive and potential vote on the
Jay,
process of.
Sorry to interrupt you, but for public comment, this is just for non-agenda items. If you want to wait and discuss that during that agenda item, that would be the time to do that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry. Are there any members, attendees online that would like to speak on non-agenda items? Agenda item number 7, to receive and potentially vote on the process of staff returning to work.
Yeah, so I shared a memo packet around returning to work. And I guess I want to preface anything that I'm about to share with the fact that our teachers and staff have been coming to work and working and serving students remotely in many hours of the day, some of them beyond what's expected of them by contract. And I applaud them for that effort. And we have other staff that some of it's one-off is they're not able to work for whatever reason. And we want to just make sure from a human resources perspective that we are aligning ourselves to the will of the committee, but also having the same high expectation from employee to employee. And what I mean by that is we hear rumors or stories, and I don't know the accuracy of some of them, but let me give you one example. Staff who had a medical procedure earlier in the year and connected to COVID and high risk, it made sense for that staff to have an extended leave. Staff is still on extended leave. And then we hear about travel plans. And now if you're high enough risk that you're not able to work, I believe that we should be mindful about how we go back to that place where that situation is not something that crosses my desk that I have to explore with HR. And the challenge is the very well intended, I think, appropriately adopted and carried out well plan that the school committee set forth to make sure we kept people whole was critical to morale, effort, workplace comfort, and really just to pull it off. And what this memo is not about is teachers or staff who are working remotely who are, again, they're working. But what this memo is about is how do we get to a place, and I need to know from the committee, when do we want to close that loop of we're going to keep everybody whole? Because there's a lot of gray area in keeping people whole. I've also heard from some teachers who have said, I'm at work doing what I should do. And this other person, well, I'm not sure what to do. And I think that that's bad for morale. When we talk about the number of educators and staff in general across the district that are doing everything they can, and the first thing they say is, it's a pandemic, I'll do whatever I gotta do for the kids. And they come and they do that, and then they have colleagues that, I don't know if it's the right term, but they're kind of milking the situation. They're taking advantage of the fact that we're willing to keep people whole and support people through very challenging times. So we started to dig a little deeper, and I worked with HR Director Kim Brown about, let's take a look at some of these things. And some of the things that were I don't know if the right word is certified, but some of the things that were certified earlier in the year that made good sense for you. We need to support you and find a way to keep you whole. But mind you, the district's paying for a substitute for that person. So we're keeping them whole and paying someone else to do the actual work. Is it time to recertify some of those things? Is it time to look at those and say, hey, at some point, we need you to come back to us and let us know that if the guidelines allow for us to return to work in the fall, that in some kind of reasonable threshold, we know you intend to come back. That if you need leave and accommodations, we can plan for that. And so to me, this was more about logistics and trying to figure out what people's intentions are, who's coming back to work, who's able to do that, who might be in a protected class and they cannot, what accommodations can we make for them? And then kind of having a date in people's minds. Because to be honest, I've had some staff tell me quietly on the side that, you know, Jake, if we go back in full in the fall, I don't know if I'm ready to do that. I have my own concerns for health. I don't know if I'm ready to do that. But if the guidelines shift and we are back to work in the fall, and we can't make accommodations, so someone doesn't qualify as a special class, that we can then work with them for accommodations, we're down to staff. And I don't know if that will be a big conversation or a small one. If that's 1 staff, 10 staff, or 100 staff. But if we're looking to open things back up and get to work, again, hopeful thinking, we don't have this in place yet. But 5 days a week, the school is running more traditional like they used to. We need to know that we have the staffing and we need to do it. And again, my caveat that I started with, people have worked their tails off to make school happen. So I don't want to come across that this was a situation where we're trying to nab people or force them to come back to work and they're teaching 120 kids online every day, all day. That's not the scenario. But we do have some other light scenarios that, you know, I think I'd like to make sure that the doctor's note still holds up, given the time, and that we're not paying you and the sub and trying to figure that out next fall. And I put June 1 on there because I think from a fiscal perspective, it gives us a good window, it gives us a month to say, if we are back to school in the fall, be thinking about that. And, you know, what accommodations might you need? Is this still for you? Because I've had some staff say it's not. So we can plan around that and have that as part of our logistics work as we move forward. But I don't see any change before June 8th when last day of school for students. But we need to roll the ball on getting some of that intent known for people so that we can be fiscally responsible, but also plan accordingly logistically.
Up for discussion, Mr. Majerus-Collins.
So I have some questions. So first, I gotta be honest, I'm having a little bit of a hard time squaring the June 1st and June 8th thing. Because I can sort of understand, you know, you want to start having the conversations before everybody, you know, it's into summer mode and then things are different. But I wouldn't want to suggest to people that they would have to change their practices 7 days before the end of the school. You know what I'm saying? Like, I guess that's one concern that I might have is that if we're going to pursue this change, we probably ought to make it effective at the start of the school years.
So if I may,
Yeah.
the problem with doing it at the start of the school year,
Yeah.
if people make that decision at that moment, those are empty classrooms. If they're not going to return to work or they need accommodations, we need to be able to plan logistically for that.
All right, what's the,
The other piece too is from a June 1 versus June 8 perspective.
Yeah.
Human resources has to work with whatever comes in. And so it'd be good to have a window of time so principals can hire, do things of that nature. We'll plan for the logistics of accommodations if they're known.
So is it the case that we're talking about on the back end staff or staff whose job it is to hire who are not working year round? That we're basically talking about? Or-
Talking about knowing the intentions as we get into the summer instead of when school's about to step back.
Okay, so I guess what I'm wondering is whether it would be okay if that was, you know, June 10th rather than June 1st, you know what I'm saying? How much of a difference does that make?
From a place of finance and planning logistically, a ton. I wish I had the information now.
Okay. All right.
So for example, like next Monday when we meet with those who are interested to talk about the logistics of returning to school and the best as we can, or alternative ideas if we're still not able to see if we can meet our students' needs better. one of the main logistics on the table will be, what do you have for staff? Availability in person, 5 days a week, and what accommodations might need to make. So I need that information, I guess,
All right.
sooner
That's-
than later. But I don't think it should have implications before the school gets out. But it'd be nice if I need to work remote and I've had an accommodation made for me, that I make sure that that's still accurate with HR and they're on board and know what accommodation I might still need.
So I guess in that instance, is it possible to change the language so that it's not, because how it's written right now, employees of Lewis Public Schools are to return to work on site by June 1st, right? And if what you're really saying is we want to know by June 1st what your intention is, maybe that's better language. Because how it reads now, I would think that somebody who'd been at home then would have to be in the building June 1st through June 8th. And that just seems a little silly to do the last week like that. But I get what you're saying about knowing in advance.
Sure.
I guess my other question is, I think that broad strokes, the reason the committee adopted the kind of policy that it did was because we didn't want to ask people to put themselves in a dangerous situation. And that people who, had personal or health reasons or, immediate family health reasons to not be exposing themselves to COVID constantly, wouldn't have to do that, could still, be made whole and do whatever work the district could find for them. The vaccine obviously makes that a situation where a lot of people can be protected. And if somebody opts not to take the vaccine, I don't have a tremendous amount of concern for that situation. What I do worry about is one of the reasons it's so important for everyone who can take the vaccine to take it is because there is a subset of people who can't. And I just want to make sure that like the FMLA stuff, that they're solid, that if you are a person who for some reason can't take the vaccine, and either for that same reason or a different simultaneous reason, you are also in a high risk category, that we're not asking you to come back.
I guess I would follow the laws of ADA rules and statutes, which do have qualifiers in there for certain scenarios. I don't know them off the top of my head.
Right.
But we do have a number of people in what I would call a gray area. This may sound insensitive, but I do have staff level concerns to return in person 5 days a week. In that we've got some people who have accommodations because of someone they're real close with or someone who lives in their home who is a high risk person. And from an employment perspective, it's going to be real challenging if we don't know their situation to either accommodate it or figure out if it qualifies well before the start of the school year. But I think in that scenario, that would actually not qualify, which is challenging. However, this school committee in this district has, and I think it's honorable to have done so, has kept those folks whole this entire school year while we paid for someone else to be in the building to provide certain services in some cases. And I think that in the midst of the pandemic and knowing the will of the committee to keep people whole, that made good sense. As we return next fall with opportunities to vaccinate, and I think shifting guidelines on the horizon, we have to be able to conduct the work of school.
I guess if I could follow.
So if those, in those scenarios, people who would not qualify under law don't qualify, then I would think that, at least my recommendation would be that we follow the law.
Right, and I guess what I would be saying is I would like to see something slightly more expansive that basically follows the spirit of what we've been doing all the way through. But with the understanding that something very fundamental has changed, that most of the people who were at risk of COVID exposure are now eligible to be vaccinated, can be medically safely vaccinated, and if they choose not to do that, then that's really on them. And for those people, I'm perfectly comfortable moving that on. I guess what I'm saying is I don't think that we should be clawing back any of the protections that we have for people who, for medical reasons, can't get vaccinated. clawing those back to the federal and state law rather than the standard we'd set throughout the school. And that's really my only point of concern on this proposal.
Mr. Physick?
Do you have any numbers of who's out for a gray area and who's actually out for because it's the law?
I think the folks that are out in gray area is a lot bigger than I realize. I don't know if I have a number off the top of my head. Would you dare an estimate, which is probably not
Just
even-
ballpark, I don't need like down to the 10th.
I don't dare to guess. If you can give me just a minute, I can maybe get a.
Ballpark.
Number of
Would you think it's greater? Do you think the people who are in the gray area is a whole lot greater than the actual people who have accommodation by law?
Yes.
How long could, like, this is sort of a rhetorical question, how long can we continue to pay both people who are in that gray area and a sub and maintain a budget and meet all the needs of our students? Like, I understand Mr. Collins' desire to keep people whole, and that definitely made sense when this started a year ago and makes sense right now, but it has to stop at some point. We can't just indefinitely pay multiple people to work one position if they're in that gray area. It seems like we have to have a stopping point at some point, and where do we draw that line? Ms. Ray?
Thanks. Oh gosh, I lost my entire train of thought. No. So that, oh, yes, okay. So currently planned for the FY 22 budget / academic year 23. Wait, no, 22. There are 4 remote positions in that budget, and that would be it for remote positions, right, through ELMS.
Yes, that's what we have at this point in time.
And are those 4 positions already hired for or not yet because they'll be new budget items? if they get approved?
I dare say both, and here's why I say that. They have people who are doing that work right now, who were not remote hired, if you will. If the positions are adopted in the budget, then they would look to place people or hire people for that. So it's some semblance of both. There were classroom teachers who said, I'm willing to help in this way, who then went and did the work. So it could be some of them, it may be others.
Okay, so those are the only 4 classified remote positions for LPS.
Yes.
And through HR, will there be any mechanism moving forward? I'm thinking especially like daily staff for remote flexibility and options in order to preserve some staff, because when I think about my work's return to work plan, we're looking at people doing remote 3 days a week, if that's what we want, things like that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I can see us trying to grant flexibility for people who have certain situations. But I guess I would go back to, we have to be consistent across the board. Again, I would lean to the law, but it's I think the will of the committee that we have to get to paper. Certainly, one thing we've learned in COVID is the flexibility of working from home. As long as the work production is there, I'm not anti-work from home. But I will say there's lots of things that, in my opinion, break down when you're not part of the space. And that can be a challenge. And I don't want to put people in bad situations. I don't want to return in ways that are not safe. But I also answer phone calls every day and contemplate with principals whether or not we have to close schools while there's people walking around with no masks on and they're like, I've been vaccinated and I'm good. So I think there'll be a new expectation in the fall for us as a district, employer perspective, to do everything we can to be back, and staffing and work production will be hard.
Okay, so LPS's intention is to be an in-person learning environment, except for those 4 teaching positions.
Well, it's dependent on the guidelines,
Sure.
which we're hoping to get sooner than later.
Thank you.
Mr. Beaumont?
While the agenda item says staff here, it seems to be primarily directed about teachers. Will this apply to administrators and central office personnel as well?
Yes, I think that's part of what I was just asking.
Just to clarify.
I see this as across the board, and it's, I want it to be consistent. And I don't mean to come off like we're talking about just teachers. I know we have some ed techs that I've had some question about that I've been a little uncomfortable with. But it's been in other places, but I want to be real clear that we're talking about a very small percentage, and the rest of everyone is carrying massive amounts of professional pride and doing everything that needs to be done during the pandemic to get things done. So I don't want that to be remiss in this conversation. But I also think those people who are doing that work, when they hear about someone going on vacation who's not able to come to work because of a health compromise, that's pretty hard for them. And I think it should be. But
Kim, were you all set?
Yes, so we currently have 31 people who are utilizing leave. And not all of those would be strictly COVID related. We also have folks who are on extended leaves of absences. So I would put the number about 40 people who are out and not working at all. And then for the gray area, there are lots of folks who, in lieu of leave, we were able to then accommodate remotely by putting a substitute in their classroom. And so that number, 40 people approximately out on leave and not working at all. A greater number, I would say a very similar number of folks, maybe even a little bit higher, being accommodated in whatever we are able to give them as a work assignment.
And I think to piggyback on Kim's numbers there, in the hybrid model, we can cover some things with less human capacity. But if the guidelines shift and there's 15, 20 students in a classroom, that's not keeping one eye on these kids and one eye on those kids, and we're rotating through and we got to figure it out because of the situation. You need someone there for that whole time. So the numbers of that coverage, I think, would grow if the model shifts.
So how many out of the people in the gray area, how many people are just actually doing nothing?
One is too many. But I think what she's saying
Is it 40?
is around 40 of them.
Plus.
So we have 40 people.
No,
But I don't want to get into specific. I can get that and bring that back to you if we want to talk about that deeply. But,
No, I don't need to talk about deep, I'm just formulating my thoughts and I want to look at that, but I get the picture now.
and some of them, again, were in the fall, even the national language was different. We had FFCRA. That expired December 3rd, so at 31st. So that didn't carry into the new year. We kind of kept that framework in place. I thought it was very clear with the committee, twice this fall, voting to keep people whole, following the Springs vote, but also when we brought back scenarios around that, the things that the committee supported. So I think we've carried out the will of the group in the vote. I'm just more concerned that we need to get back in and have a plan for that logistically.
Mr. Portman?
Jake, what, on our vote, what date did we vote to go up to keep people home?
It was for the school year. It was the
For the
way
school year. That would be ending at the date that you put down.
June 8th is the end of the school year. I guess what I'm trying to initiate is a communication circle or a cycle that lets us know administratively who's intending to do what things. Are you staying? You need accommodation. We have to plan.
I think, what Member Collins mentioned, in terms of things are changing and now we have opportunities to address everything, namely the vaccines, that I look at it as a perspective. From everything I've heard, people are back to work. All right, we have vaccines out there in this country where 65% now have been vaccinated. And I know the teachers like to pick on me that I don't support them. I do support them. But I really do hear the public and what they go through and how everyone's getting their vaccines. Going back, what's the purpose of the vaccine if it doesn't protect us to go back to work in our workplace? We're here. We're doing it now. We have availability. And if you're a teacher, it should be a priority. And as far as I'm concerned, I'd like everybody back tomorrow. I don't want to wait till June. We're here now. And we have to start asking the conversation. I believe that the intention of the board was correct in keeping people whole, not knowing what this pandemic was going to do. But now that we have answers, now that we know where we're going, now that we have, reasons, to make a case to bring people back, we should bring people back. And, if someone's legally obligated to be out, well, so be it, it's not gonna make a difference with COVID. I mean, they're gonna have whatever the situation is in their lives. But when it comes to this, we have our ability, and we talk about, well, who's had vaccines? Well, maybe this should be part of the whole conversation, that, if you're, you have to, I mean, I've been a manager in other places too, and there was always an expectation of understanding, of keep me informed, let me know what the circumstances is, and the employee would be taking care of themselves. But we have employees who are out and not refusing to take vaccines. That smacks in the wrong direction. So I just think that we have to, I want to push the envelope. I think we need to get, and the longer we wait and we drag it June 1st, talk about June 1st, that's only 2 months out from preparing for the new year. I mean, we should start now to get a good, clean start for September, and roll it. And I don't see any reason to carry this on any further than what we've already done. I really don't. That's my viewpoint. And plenty of the public's too.
Mr. Damon?
Debate this number of folks that are really out, but they have legitimate rationale back in September or December. We've carried their at full salary, at full benefits this whole time.
Correct.
And their replacement as well. If they had benefits, if they did benefits coming to them. And I guess my concern, and to some degree, we've been working. Our company's been working from day one. He's been working every day. It seems as though we set an expectation that we will allow this to continue at the end of the school year. I don't see us going back on that word at this point. 4 weeks from that day, that's what people think the expectation is. So if the new expectation started June 1, if folks can't work, then they would need to either find a different line of work. And everybody's out there, everybody in the world is trying to hire. And if we're going to be competing with the rest of the world, to fill our open positions, and we have a number. I don't know if what the number of vacancies currently is. I don't know.
It fluctuates between 85 and 95. I don't know where we are right at this moment.
85 and 95, and if we should add another 40 to that, that's 20% of the work. Well, it's not 20%, it's 10% of the workforce. It's going to be a tough fill, and to think that we have less than 3 months to actually accomplish that seems like that's a reach. I mean, I support the position saying, we got to know. If you can't come back and need accommodation, you gotta let us know that. I would say the date is May 4, but I think it's legit. I think that the way we're approaching it makes sense, and I'm fully in support of this proposal to do this so that we know. Because if we get to the point that we think we could go back to school, can't put teachers in those classrooms and we can't go back to school for staffing reasons, then that's an even bigger problem. We can't have 35 kids in a classroom with one teacher. I mean, that can't happen either. And I would see that probably one of the other real challenges we're going to have is still going to remain transportation. We've got, if we can't get them to school, it would be great to have them back in school 5 days a week. I certainly hope that we can do that in September. But I think there are some significant challenges that are still out there that we may or may not be able to anticipate. And it's an adequate goal to know what we'll get for staff. We need it.
If I could piggyback on that, from a logistics perspective, we've learned some things through this year of pandemic, and one of them is crossing over between schools. So you have X amount of kids in school 1, X amount of kids in school 2, and that's how many need to be remote. Let's say the guidelines still exist and we still have remote options that we have to try to work through. If we know in July or end of June that we have X amount of teachers who need an accommodation, who qualify and have taught remote and want to do that, then we can start to coordinate. We have to kind of break out of the who works at what school format, because if you've got 4 kids here and 7 kids there, right now we're trying to figure out, is that a class of 11? How do we cross over? And we managed to make things work, but I'd like to be able to almost put it up on the chart and say, okay, we've got this person who specializes in this, that grade level, and we have this level of need, here's the guideline, let's make that happen. And right now it's, I work at this school and I do those things. And I want to be clear, this is not just a teacher conversation. This is all of our staff. Again, some things I hear that are just anecdotal, but I heard recently too about a situation in which we're trying to figure out our state assessment, the NWAs, and some of those things have to be done. They have to be done in person, and we needed an ed tech to come in on a Wednesday to do that. And they said, well, I don't pay for childcare on Wednesdays anymore, so I'm not available. Well, if you're not available, are you working or you're not working? And how does that play out? I mean, childcare is a burden for everyone who has children, but I mean, from a work perspective, you can't just choose not to work on that Wednesday when we have work for you in person, and you work in person the other days of the week. But childcare was part of that FSCR, so it's logistical. I don't want people showing up in September thinking, oh no, Wednesdays I don't have childcare. We need to decide what we're going to care for from a policy perspective. I don't want to minimize the amazing work of so many people in this district who have made school possible. Where in some states they didn't even go until recently. They've been working all year long.
Mr. Richards, response.
So I don't have any disagreement with the broad sense that people who are eligible to get vaccinated and who aren't getting vaccinated and who are claiming that a need to not be working in person, I don't have a whole lot of patience for that category of people. But what we just heard was, okay, you have 40 or so people that are on leave that would continue regardless because it's federally protected leave. And then you have a gray area a little north of an additional 40, let's call it 50, who are able to be not working in person, working remotely because of this committee's stance on these things. Now, we're only talking about that group of 50 people, really, in the scheme of things. And we're only talking within that group, from my perspective, the 1 to 5 people who might be severely allergically severely allergic to some component of the COVID vaccine. This is a tiny, minute group of people who are not medically able to take the vaccine. It's people who have severe reactions to some element of the vaccine, or people who have severe allergic reactions to the process of being vaccinated in general. And those are 2 very small groups of people. And my point is that if you are a person, let's say you're 60 years old, you have a chronic health condition that would not qualify you under FMLA, you are concerned about being exposed to COVID, and in addition to your chronic health condition, you also are severely allergic to 1 or more components of the vaccine such that you can't get vaccinated. That's a person that, I mean, the number of those people may be 0. But that's not a person I want to throw out in the cold just because it's easier to not dive into the specifics on this. What I'm asking for is that we continue to keep people whole who are medically not able to take the vaccine while recognizing that that is like less than 5% of the overall population. That's all I'm suggesting.
Mr. Wright?
I don't disagree with what was just said. I just wanted to respond to Superintendent Lewis's information. You know, it's so disappointing to hear that there are a few folks who appear to be abusing the situation. Because I think it just really undermines the huge majority, almost an entire workforce that has bent over backwards to make this year happen in the best way possible. I mean, I'm obviously a rule follower and, try to go above and beyond for these scenarios, and it's just so disappointing. And shame on those folks for really taking advantage of what this committee has tried to do to keep people as whole as possible, keep them as safe as possible. I think, I didn't totally agree with measures of going back into the classroom right away, but I think the school pulled it off magnificently given the circumstances. And I hope those people know that it's such a poor reflection of this community and what we stand for, to not protect each other and to not take responsibility and be accountable. And it does force me into thinking that it's time to do this reassessment, is what I would brand it as personally, not a demand of return to work, but a reassessment of where people are and what accommodations we can continue to give them or not. And then they need to let us know what the plans are for next year. Because again, this is a community that is accountable to each other and responsible for each other. And it's just a real shame.
Mr. Putnam?
Yeah, so just undermining what I said earlier, I think it's gone far enough. I'd like to make a motion to accept the superintendent's recommendation with the exception word.
We have not had public speak yet.
We have to open it up for the public.
You can have a motion prior to moving to the public.
Say, usually the public is after the motion.
They have something to respond to.
Right.
Yep.
So, to accept it as presented with the exception of moving the date from June 1st to May 15th, that all Lewiston Public School employees report back to work. As seen appropriate within legal guidelines of human resources.
If I may. We have some people who are working remote, who are hypothetically teaching all day, doing everything we ask them to do, fulfilling their contracts in full, if not more. I don't need them to come to school to do that. They can successfully do the work they need to do in the current location. I just want to make sure that caveat is
That's the job.
right.
And
That
that's,
would be the
that
job.
you're recognizing that as a job. I'm talking about work, we're coming to work. So if they're working, they're working.
There a second for that? Do you want to try?
So we can have some discussion on it.
Thank you, Ron. But I just want to remind the board that we voted to kind of keep them whole and until the end of the school year. So I just want to make sure that whatever that motion isn't conflicting with what we've already decided. That wouldn't.
Yeah, we weren't looking to cease the commitment that was made for the year. It's more about the logistics and the expectations of, we got to get this in order so that we know what we have to work with.
Ron, could you elaborate on why you're changing the date that the superintendent requested?
I really think that we're under the gun time-wise, and I think the longer that we take, the worse it's going to be in September. And I want as much time as possible to get what we've gone through this year right. And I think that, again, as I mentioned, the vaccines are out there, people are back to work. And it just seems that school departments are doing everything different than what the rest of society is doing. So I don't see any reason, like David mentioned, tomorrow. Well, I'm just giving him I'd say more May 4th, except I figure he's gonna need a few weeks to kind of get the word out and get people prepared that, okay, that this is the understanding. I need to either make my case, deliver my request to human resources, get my work prepared, come back in, whatever, and I don't see why wait till June 1st. I think we're under a tremendous amount of pressure to get this system back to normal as soon as possible, and I think our opportunity is already here. I honestly, I think we should have done it a month ago, but you know, we're here now, so that's where I believe.
From a processing perspective, it will take time to get the necessary documents in and for HR to do their due diligence, you know, whatever is accepted. It's not going to disrupt by June 8th, the school year piece. But whatever we can expedite will give us the information we need to plan the logistics moving forward.
So,
Yeah, I think the date, the May 15th, you said, I mean, that just seems a little bit too soon. I guess the vaccinations are out. But like, sometimes you have to get 2 vaccinations and then there's another 2 weeks. I mean, not everybody's had that opportunity. So I just want to make sure that if we're stressing how important vaccinations are, let's make sure the time is there for those vaccinations to happen properly.
Mr. Kazak?
So basically, I just want to make sure I got this correct. This is basically, people have to have their paperwork in for the intention of whether they're coming back next year or not, or whether they gotta get a doctor's letter for accommodations or blah, blah, blah. Okay,
So even if they're not vaccinated yet, but their intention is to get vaccinated, then they could still get that paperwork or give their intention.
I mean, vaccination or not has at no point in time impacted someone's employment who was in public schools, especially, you know, where it wasn't available until, you know, early March, legitimately. So I don't think I have not been vaccinated. It would not be, like I said, we wouldn't tell someone on June 3rd, you don't have a job here, or you're not, because you're uncomfortable coming to work because you haven't been vaccinated. But I guess what I need to know is, while you haven't been vaccinated in the fall, that won't be a reason for an accommodation or guaranteed employment, compensated in the fall. Whereas this year it was.
Mr. Rogers, comments?
I move to amend the motion in 2 ways. The first, to change the date from May 15th to June 1st. And the second, to exempt any employee who's medically ineligible to get a COVID-19 vaccine.
Wouldn't that fall under the medical exemption that's already in existence?
No,
It doesn't fall under FMLA.
correct.
Okay. It wouldn't fall under FMLA?
Because what we're talking about is someone who has a chronic condition that, you know, that they just live with, right? That isn't reason enough to get leave, but with the potential to get COVID, puts them in a seriously high-risk category. And then they're also not eligible to get the vaccine, so they can't get protected from COVID. So their status is no different than it was in December. See what I'm saying?
But wouldn't their doctors, if all those pieces are in place, then their doctor would say that this person is still in a high-risk category.
But we're scrapping the high-risk category thing. We're dropping back to just FMLA. If we go ahead and pass this, we're dropping all the stuff about high risk or anything. It's just what you're entitled to under normal conditions under federal and state law. So I'm just asking for a carve out for people who actually can't get the vaccine. Everybody else would get it.
Which they could get medical documentation to support.
Yes, but would have to. I mean, in order to qualify here. But what I'm saying is, I really don't want to put anybody in a situation
Yeah.
where.
Yeah, you might want to think that, I think. And again, this would not, none of this would impact staff who are currently working remote, who are doing their job, who are carrying out the tasks as assigned. This is about that notification for future, so we have the logistics to sort.
Right, as this conversation has gone, you are correct that family medical leave does not have a provision for the folks that you were describing. So FMLA would just be for one's own serious health condition where a medical professional certifies that they are incapacitated, they have a period of incapacity where they're unable to work. And so that would be FMLA, and that would be leave. But then we still have those folks who are high-risk individuals for COVID who may qualify for an accommodation under the ADA. Because of this long-term chronic condition, they would be considered, for the purposes of the law, disabled and unable to perform their job without a reasonable accommodation. So then the first step would be for my department to look to see if there's a way that we can accommodate their need and lower their risk of contracting COVID in the workplace, whether it's a different workspace or providing shields or providing N95 masks. We would do whatever, I guess the least restrictive means of correcting the problem. And we would continue looking at solutions to protect them in the workplace. And so it would not be, as soon as you're certified to be high risk being placed out on leave, we would try to look at every possible reasonable accommodation to make it so that these individuals could work. And I think that we're in a very different position now with the different measures that we can put in place than maybe we were in the fall based on what we know and how it's spread. And so we would look at lots of different accommodations for those individuals. If we were unable to reach a reasonable accommodation, then at that point we could address leave. There is still a legal provision.
So this, as it's written, wouldn't eliminate protections for people that fall into that middle ground.
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Majerus-Collins.
I understand that that would be the district's position, but I think you could easily come up with a situation where there's a disagreement about what constitutes a reasonable accommodation. And I think an easier way of doing this is to just provide a carve out that says, if you are one of the vanishingly small number of people who is not medically eligible to get a vaccine, then our change in policy doesn't apply. I mean, we're not talking about a large number of people. We're talking about a very small group, and one that I think it is reasonable to provide continuing accommodation for in the manner that we've done so far this year.
So that provision is there regardless of by federal law statute.
I second it.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I just.
It was just-
But I think what Director Brown is explaining is the protection that James Collins is talking about, but I'm not certain.
It's built in, is what you're trying to say?
Well, if you qualify for ADA, the accommodations, do everything you can to accommodate, that's to the laws and statutes. I guess that's what I'm here. I'm trying to clarify if that question is answered by the laws and statutes that exist for protections.
And what I'm saying is, for this group of people, my concern is that the district potentially finds itself at cross purposes vis-a-vis what a reasonable accommodation looks like. And so I'm saying this is a tiny group of people who are both at elevated risk for COVID and which is a big group of people, but it's not everyone, and are medically not able to get the vaccine, which is a tiny group of people, less than 5% of the overall population. That if you find yourself in that group of people, that the back and forth on what constitutes a reasonable accommodation, protect you at school or what is not something that we need to go through. That you're going to continue to be protected as we have protected you so far this year, until such time as there's not a reasonable thought that you might be exposed to COVID at school.
Any further discussion on Mr. Majerus-Collins' amendment? No?
Yes.
Okay.
So if somebody has the ADA, I don't know where I want to go with this. So if they don't get a vaccination because of medical conditions, and then they're covered under ADA, and then we try to make accommodations and we can't make accommodations, then what happens to that group of people? Are they still covered and they still get paid? Do they go out on disability? I don't.
So they would be covered through the end of this year and be kept whole. They'd be put out on leave for the remainder of the school year, and following the school committee decision in the fall, they would be kept whole. After that, we would examine to see, is it reasonable? Will they ever be able to meet the expectations of the job? And at that point in time, it would be a decision on how to handle that. If it's this person will never be able to meet the minimum expectations of the job requirements, then it generally leads to finding a different position for them where they might be able to meet those requirements, or they find a different line of work where they are able to meet the requirements of the job. I think that, if I may, COVID just has, is fallen under these laws that have been around for quite some time. And so I think that there will be a lot more guidance in the next year or so as to how ADA and COVID goes together well. It does provide protections now. However, there may be more nuance developed in the next year, so that we don't handle it in the same way as someone who has a very physical job and had a very devastating back injury and now no longer performing the requirements of the job. It's a very different situation. So we may have some more legal guidance soon on how.
Mr. Physick?
Quick question, if somebody's out for, like, they have the 2 chronic condition and they're out now, this is what we have now, and this thing goes through, will we look to, I mean, let's just say like the hard work and dedicated, they've done everything through the sun on remote, will we be looking to say, you know, we recognize that you're a small group and we'll, you know, basically, you know, 99.9% really just look to accommodate these people?
We always look to accommodate, because the other layer to this too is we're asking for documentation, which is appropriate.
Yeah.
And with that documentation, our goal is to determine if someone's qualified or not, and then accommodate them best of our ability. There's a lot of different ways you can accommodate, so it's not a you're off the bus kind of scenario. But I guess when I talk about logistics for the fall, let's say 40 people would have this caveat, this area where they claim, and we're back to school full time, 5 days a week in person. I'm going to figure out 40 different scenarios which they can either work remote or can accommodate that effort. But again, I'm more leaning toward, let's get it documented. Let's give all the protections that are in place by federal law and state statutes, rules and laws. Continue to work.
Further discussion on Kiernan's amendment to the motion? Not, or
Point of order, you go to public.
Got 3, I got 3 yes.
okay. Just clarifying question probably for Mr. Ray. So the hands have been up all along. So are we taking discussion on everything right now, or are we taking discussion right now just on the amendment that's on the table?
I would take discussion on, I mean, anything related to the amendment will be related to the item writ large. So
Okay.
I would just say anything goes, reactions and feedback on
Okay.
both of the proposals would be helpful.
Perfect. We're just like too deep now and I'm getting a little confused.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay.
So J. Rich, McMahon Elementary School. So first, I'd like to say that I'm addressing the staff that are working remotely as it was intended. Of course, we'll always have bad apples, whatever way we go. Second, I'd like to point out the wording was a little tricky when you say return to work. It kind of implies that these teachers aren't working, and so maybe it could have been worded like return to the school building. Let's see. I'd like to ask a few questions. First, what would the logistics of this look like due to the CDC social distancing requirements? Most of the possible learning space is currently being used right now. So even if teachers were to return to the building, where would they go? For example, I'm working in a classroom right now with another ELL teacher that is used as a second grade classroom. So the classroom I'm usually in is not adequate due to ventilation and it doesn't have windows. So where would this teacher go if she came back? Where would our students go? And I know that McMahon is not the only school that has this issue right now. My next question is why? What would be the point of having our most vulnerable staff members come into the building for 5 school days as the cases are rising rapidly. The New York Times last week cited the LA area as being the third highest city in the country for new COVID cases. It feels a lot like micromanagement and control. To close, I'd like to ask when the last time you guys were in a school building. I've invited every member multiple times to my classroom to see what we are doing and how we are doing it. The invitation continues to stand, so you're always welcome to come and join me. I'm glad that members Physic, Majoris, Collins, and Ray were able to join me for my online classes, but we also need you in the building. And I would like to thank Member Potvin for spending a day with me a couple of months ago and seeing firsthand the work we do and the tight quarters we are in. That meant a lot that you came to us. Thank you. So in conclusion, I think that this is very worrisome for a lot of our teachers that do have pre-existing medical conditions that bar them from coming into this school building. I appreciate you giving me this time to speak, and I'm always happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Do you want to start bringing people that are online? Allison, Avery?
Allison Avery here. I work remotely on ELMS at the middle school. I just want to bring up that a lot of our teachers who are working remotely right now are working harder than ever. And as Ms. Rich just said, a lot of our spaces that are in the building are being utilized for other locations, for other classes and other things that are going on in the school. And I would also really like to pull out the wording from this memo that Superintendent Langlist shared. I would like to share the expectation that as of June 1st, 2021, all employees of Lewiston Public Schools are returned to work on site. There are not enough spaces on site for that to happen. And I know personally my own classroom is being used as a counseling office for students, and I don't know as I would have a space to go back into the school. I think there are a lot of logistical obstacles that are not being thought through for this. And for that 5 days, I don't think that the disruption for staff and students would be really beneficial. I understand the need to know that if we're going to be in person next year and what those expectations will be, but I don't think that this is an appropriate way to do that in supporting our staff. We've done a lot through this school year. We've bent over backwards. We've done all of the PD that we've been asked to. We're still waiting on that stipend that was promised to us about a month ago. We still have not received that. This is also Teacher Appreciation Week, and this is not making any of your staff feel appreciated by any stretch of the imagination.
Thank you. Allison Lynn.
Thank you. Allison Lynn, LEA President. I have to start by saying this has been a frustrating conversation to listen to. I certainly prefer being part of conversations, and this topic particularly has come up without much conversation going both ways. I do acknowledge that there are multiple units involved in this and that it is not just an LEA matter, though the discussion tonight seems to kind of lend to the assumption that the majority of staff are either certified or ed tech positions that are being impacted. I would ask, I know there was a little bit of research done there to get that 40 number. I would ask that there be a breakdown of that, as I've heard multiple committee members state teachers again and again and again. I do appreciate that Superintendent Langlis has corrected that, but the 40 employees are possibly within food service, custodial, ed tech certified, admin, or even central office staff that are currently within these categories. So if at all possible, I would ask that for the public's sake, that be noted, that there are this many people within this unit, that many people within that unit, and please stop saying 40 teachers. With that said, I do support the intention of this. I think that it is only fair that individuals have an intent either to return or not. And with that said, we do sign a form each year in June that is either mailed to us or delivered via email. I'm not sure how it will be done this year, but that is returned. And that states that we are accepting a position regardless of if folks are probationary or if they are in a veteran category. We are accepting a position for the following year. I would think that with that, you could simply ask if individuals are seeking accommodations for that matter so that we could begin planning. I know that we will be meeting on Monday, and I would hope that this would have been a topic of conversation that would come up with the logistics group. I'm sure the conversation will continue as well, but with the memo written as it was, there was definitely some clarity concerns, and folks felt almost attacked, I would say. I am not aware of many individuals at all within our unit of 800 plus that have not been working this year. I'm aware of individuals that have personal situations that are either health related for themselves or for dependents that they are caregivers for, not just individuals in the household, but there are definitely situations that have come up with infants and such. And HR has been great about working with those. But if the common consensus is that people are misusing this, then I would ask that there be evidence to back that claim. It's a very blanket statement with employees coming back to work. We are all working, I assure you. So I apologize for the frustration in my message here, but again, certainly prefer to be part of conversations and not just reactionary to them. Thank you.
Melinda, you're ready, you're free to speak.
Hi, sorry, I had to unmute. My name is Melinda Karen. I am a teacher at Lewiston High School, and I am currently remote. Just to give a little bit of background for me, I am one of those people that you're talking a small percentage that has significant health issues. Not only am I a diabetic, but a severe diabetic. I am also someone who has asthma, bronchiectasis, and a blood disorder. The blood disorder does keep me from being able to get vaccinated because there has been a link to the vaccine causing the blood disorder that I already currently have, which lowers my platelet counts. So I can get no platelet counts and bleed to death. So I can't get a doctor who will at this point approve me for the vaccine. I would implore you guys to really think about looking at teachers individually, because I have worked very hard this year. I've made myself available nights. I currently am online at 7:30 in the morning on Zoom, and I don't usually get off my Zoom until 3:30. I am also back on, and I do an extra 2 nights a week shift for those students who need extra support at night. We are all who are remote are working hard. We are trying to connect to our students. I reach out to my parents. I reach out to students. I make myself available to kids at any point that I can. It doesn't mean that I don't want to be back in the building, because I absolutely would love to be back in the building and be with my students face to face and work with them. At the same point, I want to stay alive. I don't want to get COVID at 50 years old and die and not see my children be raised and not see my grandchildren grow up. And I know there's other teachers who we are in that position where we want to continue to teach. We want to be involved with our students, but we don't want to put our life in jeopardy. I don't want to have to go back June 1st and worry, am I going to get COVID in the next 5 days and not survive? I want to keep my job with Lewiston. I'm on the end of my 13th year. I love my students. I love my families that I work with. And I want to continue to work with those students and those parents. I implore you, just look at individual cases. Don't put us as a blanketed group that we're home and we're not working, or that we're trying to avoid being in the building because we want to stay home. That is not the case for most of us. So I would ask that you guys look at individual cases and look at them individually rather than putting us as a group. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for speaking. So I guess the memo that you put together for us and then the motions, are we saying, I guess I'm not understanding exactly what we're asking. Are we asking for people to be back in school before the end of the school year, like in the buildings? Or is this just to notify us if they'll, by this date, if they'll be returning?
I guess from a discussion point, hearing the feedback, I think there's some language in the memo that is being interpreted a little different than I intended, but as I heard it, it reads that way. So
Right.
I apologize. My intent is that we get notified by staff of what their intentions are. If they currently are being kept whole, they have to let us know what their next step is. We need to know if they are coming to us with a note that they qualify for things within the law, for accommodations, or we're looking at being able to plan that they're going to be on board next fall if we're in person. But I think Ron said it well earlier that those people are working right now. And so, for the Melindas of the world who just shared that story, I happen to know Melinda, I'm sure she would mind me saying this. She was the first one to knock on the door and say, I need this, and this to meet the kids' needs at home. And she got after it. And I would actually applaud her effort and many others. So the intent of this is not to say, if you don't show up for work on June 1st, you don't have a job. It's not the intent. The intent is, what is your status? And with the evolving world of guidelines, what will be your capacity, again, under the law and the protections that exist for the fall, so that we can be planning that work. And some of it hinges on just the gray area of the fall. It's some things that were approved and made sense at the time, and we know a lot more, and the vaccines do exist. So again, I think with documentation, it makes sense to make sure people are protected and have accommodations, but within the law.
Mr. Madeira's comments.
I just want to encourage people to take to heart what we heard. I was thinking about all of this in very hypothetical terms and hypothetical people, but we just heard from someone who would be directly impacted by what we're about to vote on. And I would also ask unanimous consent specifically to the person who seconded to add a third issue, which would be to the amendment, which would be that this is an instruction to staff to notify the district rather than an instruction to return to in-person work, just so that we can clarify the language there. But without objection, I would add that as an additional part of my proposed amendment to my proposed motion.
That was your intent with the memo?
That was my intent.
Okay, then I would-
And again, I'll say publicly, I own my mistakes. That language was a little more harsh than certainly than I intended. So I apologize for creating undue angst around that. That is the intent. We need to know where people are at for next steps. And so we can do our planning. I would say though, there's a caveat to this, that we'll need an endpoint at some place, because this isn't just about, as President Whitten said, this is not just about teachers and ed techs who their year is about to close up. We have people in other areas of work that are also part of this conversation, and their year doesn't stop. You know, their obligations don't stop to the year when the students start on the 8th.
But not the next, right?
Yeah, because so that was gonna be my next kind of question is, so we know that teachers who are actually in the classroom with students are gonna be more at risk to get COVID versus someone in an office that has their own office, maybe like in the Dingley building, right? So are we wanting administrators who have their own office and are not with children coming back? Are they not in person now? Like I guess, do we have to say if it's none or all, can we say that certain people have to come back versus don't? I mean, are you asking for something more than just the teachers coming back?
Yeah, I think I'm asking for everyone to come back
But
to
be-
work.
but
It's gotta be
before-
consistent.
But before the, fall start.
Well, I think it may bear another conversation. The June 1st language that I was using was about, we need to know. And give people a window of time to make a decision for themselves or contact the doctor if they need to know, to go through that process. We have some people that their doctor's notes qualifies them for ADA. We don't need them to re-up just to re-up. This is more about that gray area of people that have been kept whole and making sure we know where we're at logistically. But I would say, if you don't qualify, we need to figure that out as a district. Because I don't want to tell a teacher who may not qualify that I expect them in their room September 1st and have multiple people in other kinds of jobs not. I don't think that that's right to do. So I would be looking for an across the board expectation. But again, people who qualify, we can make accommodations. There's also more flexibility today because of the ability to do certain things from home with the technology that we have. So we be mindful of that. But one example is if I have a principal say, I want to work from home next week, when there's students in the building, that's not the approach that we would take.
Right.
And can they really be accommodated in that way if they qualify? And I think that's the work that Director Brown was talking about.
Ms. Wright.
Thank you. So I want to encourage my colleagues to vote in favor of the amendment. I realize it's maybe a little bit more in depth than I would have proposed, but I do want to give the superintendent and HR the time to do this work that they need to do with reassessing where folks are and what their needs continue to be or do not continue to be. I want that to be an accurate reflection, and so I think giving them until June 1st, it seems reasonable to me. When I first read this, my interpretation of it was we intend to be an in-person school district, and so folks have to come to terms with that. And I know the call back to the office has not been my favorite process, but what I signed up for, and so now that there's some maturity with the vaccine, things have changed and they have to continue to change for us to offer that in-person learning opportunity as a public school. I realize there are some folks who will continue to be accepted from that, and I think that's reasonable and the right thing to do, but I think it's time to do that reevaluation of where we are and what we do for next year.
Mr. Vogel.
So under the conditions, you feel the traditional letter of intent is not sufficient?
I don't, because I think we have people that have not worked much of the year who've been kept whole, who signed a letter of intent last fall. So to me, it's and letters of intent are just that. I think it helps us plan logistically for who's going to be around, but it doesn't plan for the pandemic of whether or not someone qualifies for ADA, and respectfully, I think that's the responsibility of the HR department, if we're familiar with the law and the provisions accordingly, and not for someone to determine on their own. I say that carefully. And I think a letter of intent with, yes, I plan on coming back, it's missing a number of things of, will you be able to come back in person. If that's where the district is at with the guidelines. And again, accommodations can be made in certain conditions that qualify, but the other thing that happens to us, we have a lot of people resign over the summer. So that letter of intent it's a nice to have, but it's not binding to the point that people don't also choose other districts or have a life situation change that requires new accommodations or easing of accommodations or things of that nature. So I do think it needs to be, because it requires a doctor's note to make it a qualifier for a protected class, for us to plan for those accommodations. I do think it should be in that instance.
Something you just said made me think of something. So if we're having people present this information sometime over the next few weeks to determine the level of accommodations they might need in the fall, will that be reevaluated in the fall? Because things do change over the course of the summer. So will there be another reevaluation period in a few months?
I mean, I think when you go through protected class documentation, there's follow-up that's built into it, if you will. So if people qualify for certain things, some of those are ongoing, some of them have check-ins, some of them have just, there's all those processes are built in. So
somebody that might not be eligible for accommodations now, but has something that happens over the summer that might change by fall, and then that would be reevaluated then, even if they were excluded now.
Right.
Okay.
And I mean, employees have rights and responsibilities, and I think the process around this is so that we have the logistics to know what we have going into our plan.
Any further? Oh, Mr. Vogel?
Contracts gone up to the teachers to be signed and returned yet?
We've sent out some of them for our probationary folks, and then the rest come, usually it's when those come.
Mr. Putnam?
So Jake, basically the people in the gray area, not a whole lot happens. Because we're gonna honor the earlier thing that we passed, keeping people whole right till the end of the year. So if they can't get their documentation and they're not working, then they're just gonna be covered anyways, right? They're gonna get paid anyways.
Well, the initial agreement from the school committee was for the school year. So last day for students is the 8th, for teachers it's the 9th. I would anticipate for that group it's that, but I would also anticipate it for custodians and front office staff and other collective bargaining agreements that date of the 8th, 9th of June is universal. That we're anticipating that we know your status, we know what we need to do for accommodations, and know what your intentions are connected to that. Again, those people in that grade.
So for those that can get documentation and they're gonna get accommodated, it's a no-brainer. There's a reason for their accommodation. It is what it is. But for those that don't get accommodated or don't have now the required information to stay on leave, what happens to them for the last month? Just nothing?
Everybody's whole till the end of the school year, regardless of what passes tonight.
Right.
So nothing's ever changed over there.
Until the, what I would say would be the, David, did the screen fall asleep?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, it popped up. Sorry, it went down for a second.
Yeah, so what we're saying is that memo that he wrote, I think he may have missed a couple words in there, and that wasn't the intent to get people back before June, but for us to be notified before June of what their intention is for the next school year.
So everybody will remain, that is whole right now will remain whole until the end of this school year, regardless of whether they're a teacher in ed tech, janitorial, administrative, no matter what. This is only requesting that they provide documentation for how we will keep them whole, or how we will make accommodations, or how we will part ways in the fall, depending on each person's situation. And anyone that has any sort of legitimate reason to remain on leave, like some of the people that we heard about tonight, this is not going to negatively impact them.
Right, so, I mean, there's processes in place for this through ADA, FMLA. I am a little curious though, of the medically exempt people who might bring a situation, which Kieran mentioned in his amendment, which was seconded. And then really the intention here is to get the information we need to know who needs what accommodations, who qualifies, who does not, and get this thing back to a place where if we are in person, the guidelines adjust, we know what we have for staffing patterns. And also I would say fiscally, that we get to a place where if the accommodation must be that we have another staff on site and somebody else working remote, we'll follow the laws around that. But it shouldn't be practice. I don't think it should be standard practice for what we have right now is, I think, a number of people who might otherwise be.
Mr. Madras comments.
I just want to encourage people to vote for the motion, the amendment to the motion, and then hopefully if that passes the motion, we'll see. The most salient difference, in addition to moving member Codman's date from the 15th to the 1st back to what the superintendent had asked for here, and clarifying the language to what the superintendent intended, is just to provide one more category of people who have a reasonable exemption, and that reasonable exemption is they're not medically able to get vaccinated. And so because COVID is a new thing and laws like the ADA were not written in a time of the COVID pandemic, we don't have all the proper stuff in place for protections for employees, but this is a way to ensure that someone who's not able to get vaccinated is protected. They're exempt from this policy moving forward. And the only, and so then we're only talking about people who actually can get vaccinated and thus have a lot less reason to be concerned about returning in whatever capacity the school district needs them, in whatever capacity their personal circumstances enable them to do. So I would just encourage people to keep in mind what we heard tonight and to support folks who have a medical prohibition on getting a COVID vaccine.
Just one clarifying question.
Yes.
Along the lines of that amendment. This is for people who wish to have that conversation about accommodation. Because I know some staff who may be able to go and get a doctor's note who choose not to, and I don't want to compel them.
Oh,
I
yeah,
don't want to say they cannot work
of course.
unless that is their wish.
No, this is
And accommodations
only,
can be made.
I mean, you know, if somebody has a terrible disease that puts them at great risk, but their desire is to be in the classroom, we're not going to stand in their way. But this is to allow people who are not able to get vaccinated, and that is a concern for them that would cause them not to want to be potentially exposed to COVID, to avoid that exposure.
And just for record, what was the third part of your amendment?
Just that it's not an actual order to return to work. It's a requirement that people notify the district about their intentions.
With appropriate documentation.
With, yeah.
All right, any further discussion on the amendment? Or do you want to?
That third part, did you second that?
She did.
I think every two weeks.
Okay. Thanks for the-
Or 2,
Yes.
3,
Yes.
4,
No.
5,
Yes.
6,
No.
7.
Yes.
City council?
Yes.
No.
Bruce.
Ward 1, sorry.
Motion passes 5-4.
So now we just take the main motion, which is the same.
We don't have to do anything with this motion.
We have to now take up the main motion because the
Fine.
amendment to substitute passed. It's silly, but we just take it up again on the same session.
My motion becomes what he just amended.
Right.
So now we're voting on the main motion.
So folks might agree with it now, knowing it's successful.
And another point of order. This is now a situation in which if this is not adopted, then the superintendent's recommendation is adopted in no way. And we just continue as things work.
Was this a different motion?
Or there's a different motion.
So
So-
can you clarify what we're
yeah.
voting on now?
So right
please?
now, the motion before you is to accept the document as written with the amendments of using June 1st to medically exempt for being vaccinated staff. And the third piece is that they will notify the district of their intentions with the appropriate documentation.
And what did?
That's what we just voted on.
What did we just vote on?
Just
That
vote
was
on the amendments only.
So you still have to deal with the main motion. The main motion must now turn into the amendment motion because if the
That's
amendment
a
had
successful
failed, we would be dealing with Mr. Kaufman's original motion. So we have to take the vote again. The numbers might come out differently.
So we're
Less
essentially
different.
voting on the same thing again.
Correct, yes,
Yes.
because it's an amendment by substitution.
The difference is what I was intending to do was to put people back to work on May 15th.
I get that,
It's
but
been amended that it's only going to be to report and to inform administration, human resources of the intent, and that it's going to be June 1st.
so we just voted to amend Mr. Poppins, and now we're voting to confirm that amendment.
Now we are voting to adopt it.
On the motion
Got it.
as amended.
Okay. Ward two,
No, I'm like, so basically voting on the same thing he's voting on, yes.
Yes.
3, 4,
No.
5,
Yes.
6,
No,
7,
Yes.
city council,
Yes.
no, Ward one.
Motion passes 5-4.
Is anyone opposed to taking a quick break? Yes, you're opposed, or no, you're not opposed?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Sorry.
we will continue with agenda item number 8 to receive and approve the reallocation of LCIP funds. Who wants to present?
I shared with you this afternoon document, but I'm going to walk through it so everyone understands, and also for the public to hear. I was pretty busy chasing COVID and other related things. I apologize if I get the memo to you sooner. But I want to go through some things. Each year, we have the opportunity to reallocate and go through a process to authorize LCIP funds that are either, for various litany of reasons, might have money sitting there. And certainly we know we have incredible facilities needs to make sure our infrastructure continues to support our students. So what I wanted to do was to have a conversation, share some information with you, and see if I can get some direction so that I can bring back something to you for approval, unless there's a solid direction in the motion tonight to act on something now. But what I'd like to do is have facilities and finance have some say in this once we have some more direction, and bring back a plan to you on the 17th of May so that it could potentially be adopted and then get to city in time for it to be authorized, hopefully if they also agree to it. And so there's reasons for funds that are remaining. And these include, from the memo, items that did not cost as much as anticipated, or the scope was adjusted due to cost. One example was a paving project. There's some funds that still sit there that are unspent, connected to the loop up here up front before the construction began. Modification for what was intended by the project was somewhere around 4 times more than what was granted in the LCIP because of petroleum costs skyrocketing. It was the right estimate, it was the right approval, but the scope of the work became so expensive that they modified the project, did what they could, but it left some unspent dollars there. So there's examples like that. Some things do come in under budget. That has happened a few times, or once we get digging into something, we find that it costs a little less than anticipated, so there could be extra money or leftover funds for that. Some funds are allocated projects that far exceed estimates, and so they weren't completed. One example of that right now is we have funds in LCIP to replace the roof at Dingley. There's $300,000 in LCIP funds to replace that roof, and the recent quote from our facilities director, Josh Bro, was over $700,000, I believe. So you have this money sitting there, and you can't even do half the roof with the money that was approved. Again, when estimated, it was the right estimate, X, Y, Z, and cost of things just became so far out of scope that those funds remain. I will also note that roof continues to leak. Assistant Superintendent Karen Paquette has a small hole, or maybe not even small, but a hole in her roof. There's plans in place for it to be addressed because plaster has fallen from the ceiling. She looks up and she can see into the attic. And so, these are things that we're looking to correct.
She has a natural water pump.
Natural water. And another example is funds for projects that were phased in that have not reached the final phase. And one example of that is years back, the school committee made a commitment, and as did our city, made a commitment to a security project. We had an audit. We had lots of good information about hardening and surveilling some of our spaces. And in that effort, there was I think it was a 4-phase plan that was created. And so some allocation each year to do certain pieces of the project. Well, the last allocation for that was not passed. I believe that was last year. And so we have funds to do things in phases, and that work is still in process and continues, but the funds to finish the project don't currently exist. And I put more other, because there's lots of reasons why there could be LCIP funds that remain. And so I'm just sharing this with you as information so we can think about what our next steps will be, so I can bring something back to you on the 17th to approve it, again, unless there's a motion tonight. But I wanted to get feedback, and there's 3 areas when I talked with Bobby, when I talked to Josh, when I talked to Karen, and just looking at different ways in which we can try to prioritize these things. And so I put them in a bulleted list. These are not prioritized, they're just a short list. So I gave you 3 items to be thinking about, and you may have others. One is security. Again, that was a multi-phase project, district-wide. It's informed. The process did not receive the final phase of funding. And some projects that are connected to that have not been done because that's a piece that they need to know before they can get to it. The second one is Longley. Longley building is in need of infrastructure improvements. The interesting thing is a decent chunk of money has been approved to do door and entry upgrades at the school for security purposes. And then as they got into it, they found out that this would get into the nitty gritty. Some of the door molding pieces are connected directly through metal framing to the window pieces. And so the cost of doing that work was exponentially higher than they anticipated. But there's some money there. Could it be used differently at that site to support the use of Longley as we've already been working towards? The third bullet I put is Dingley. Our central office building is in need of attention or what I call a plan B. And I'm not looking to move tomorrow, but I have to say, in no uncertain terms, and I'm sure Karen and Dave can chime in because they both work there, and Kim as well. Our building is not big enough for the staff that we have. There is no privacy. For example, if human resources needs to make a phone call to a staff about a serious matter, they have to make specific measures to ensure that that call is private. Because they work in cubicle-like spaces, in a space that's really big enough for one person. There's two, sometimes a time three working in that area. Upstairs, we have numerous people working in smaller makeshift spaces that, again, it just doesn't accommodate the level of need. And we need our staff to be able to have those conversations in private when appropriate. So we're thinking about just the sheer size. It's not big enough. So over the years, there's been discussions and LCIP conversations about what would it take to make that building more usable. And we've talked about transition some of the spaces to make an office. Obviously, it needs a roof to protect the thing. There's been a $1.1 or $1.2 million design full-on plan for the downstairs, where some people currently have offices in some spaces, but it's exposed brick. It's not heated. It's not ventilated. Well, it's not heated well. It's not ventilated. And so that there's a lot of ways in which we could use that downstairs space, but we'd have to do work to it. And on top of all that, and COVID, I think, exacerbated the conversation, but there's no mechanical ventilation in the building whatsoever. And so all those things combined, we have a space that's too small. It needs roughly $2.5 million worth of investment to make it usable or more usable to the fullest extent. Well, we need to start having conversations about a plan B. But what I did want to do was propose to you that we move money from other little pockets and get it authorized and fix a roof on a building that is going to cost close to $1 million, that still doesn't have ventilation, that still doesn't have the downstairs workspace, that is still overpopulated with staff. Or do we start looking at ways to do all of that and stay committed to that building for another 20 years? I'm not opposed to that, but if we're doing that, we should know before we invest $1 million here and $1 million there.
So we're thinking, looking for different real estate.
We have had discussions kind of quietly about different real estate options. The real challenge is relief funds. There's conversation that you can lease spaces with relief funds, which might help us for the next couple of years, but it doesn't solve that long-term problem of using that
You
space.
can't buy something with relief funds.
We're asking for more clarification with the third round. The rules are still not fully posted. We may be able to purchase, but we haven't heard that as a yes yet. But again, with the direction of the committee, I might invest more energy in that avenue if that's something that the committee would like to look at.
Isn't there a couple items that you mentioned on your list already included in this year's CIP request to the council? The security items and the Dingley pieces?
The security, I don't anticipate it being moved forward. I don't believe the latest I've heard. And the other one was middle school heating was a big project in that proposal. The other items that I'm talking about are either in progress if we continue down that road, or not those items.
Can I ask Bruce, $700,000 for a roof replacement? Is that about right for the Dingley building? I never spent that kind of money on a public building roof.
Well,
two issues. One is it's 120, 30, 40 years old. It's a slate roof. There's all kinds of rot. If you look at it, there isn't anything that is pitch about like this. It's slate, which limits you to currently about 2 vendors statewide. You're probably 3 companies in New England that do slate roofs like that. And it's just a horror show to do that. And it's really, it's not sustainable. Slate roofs 100 years ago, you know, that was, they thought they would last forever. Well, forever's here, come and gone. Nobody does slate roofs anymore. I'm not surprised that it costs that much. In fact, actually, I'm surprised that it wasn't more. If you look at some of the way they have to do it, there's gonna, when they start to open that up, they're gonna find all of this rot in the wood that's below the shingles, and below the slate roof shingles. It's gonna be the price of $700,000, probably be looking at having another $100,000 to $200,000 in change orders for a lot of time. It's just unfortunately, for all that the Dingley building is a cute little old building, it's a cute little old building that is obsolete at just about every level. And probably should be turned over to some private developer to turn it into cute little apartments. It's really not, in my mind, it's well outlived its useful purpose, and it's really not, if we're going to move forward as a district, really, I believe, need to probably look elsewhere. It's almost impossible to ventilate it. And with the new requirements under where we're at today, it's a, right now, it's a money pit. And it will continue to be for some time. That's just because I looked the building over some with Josh and Jake and just using my experience. It's tough because it is a historic building and it's in a great location. But there's no way you can add on to it. There's no way you can really do much with it that's going to ever make it fix it.
Ms. Wright?
So in response to the memo and what we have proposed, I think I would like the school department to aim for scaling back to about 2 to 3 million in projects. I think the hill I would rather die on is preserving our operational budget at this point than our capital improvement budget, because I think, you know, borrowing that money and paying the interest on it when some projects don't come to fruition. We've talked about through the COVID relief funds how, you know, jamming projects into a set time frame hasn't really worked to our benefit over the past year and a half or so. And so I do worry about that going forward into the next LCMP year. I think there's been great strides made and efforts made for facilities and finance committees to try to plan for the future in a more 5-year time space. And I think that will help us better predict how we can do this work, especially with only having Josh currently and hopefully another person to help manage these projects going forward. That will increase our capacity to be able to bring these things online, but I don't want our money sitting in a bonded space, you know, where we have to pay interest on that principal going into next year. I think it would be more planful. I think that will be the year FY23 to go for bigger in terms of the budget of the LCIP, but I think the council is really interested in maybe not getting to the 80% bond limit, but getting closer to it, because that debt load and paying that interest is really what kills us, because we have to do it, and then we're really down to what we can do operationally to serve our kids by what's in those things. And I get going through a report, but I mean, LMS seems so decrepit at this point that I mean that we need to look for a different path for that, similar to what we're predicting currently.
Mr. Response.
I want to first ask a clarifying question. This is not actually a discussion of the LCIP that is pending, right? This is a conversation about reallocating existing
Correct.
funds.
It's existing already approved, years past.
So we'll set aside that conversation for another time. I'm a big believer in committing to the spaces that you have. I think that it's easy to metaphorically and perhaps literally poke holes in Dingley. But the reality is that the prospect of either building a new administrative center for the district or purchasing a new administrative center for the district is, I can't imagine would be well in excess of what it costs to restore Dingley. It's also, frankly, I don't think something that the city would be particularly excited about having as the next LPS project, that we're going to build a new space or purchase a new space that doesn't see any actual direct student use. And then all of that aside, I think that we should stay in downtown. And I would worry dramatically about LPS moving further away from, the folks I represent, who have a hard time sometimes getting out to some of our further flung sites. And obviously it's going to be cheaper and easier to find a location to build something that's further outside of downtown, but I will be strongly opposed to that. I think that we should make the investment to make Dingley what it needs to be, the best it can be, and hopefully continue to have it serve an educational function for Lewiston for many years to come. And then I think that we should invest in Dingley. I think we should invest in Longley. And I think that if we can do security, great. But if not, I would prioritize those two buildings ahead of the security projects.
That's right.
So I've lost my mind. Sorry, my comments were not relevant then. I apologize for that. I just reread the memo and now I understand what we're talking about. So that's great. It's been a really long year, guys. I would agree that pushing security down a bit as we continue to assess who's in the building and how often we're going to be needed in the building is important. It really does seem worth preserving as I think about city projects. We talked about the potential, there's the upcoming move, of the central fire station from the downtown area to a nearby location, but they're going to be rebuilding that. The police building is in disrepair, and I think the council will react in future years to act on that. And then the violations, or the former violations bureau, is under the city's ownership and use by much of parts of the police department at this point, are three upcoming projects. So I think there's not going to be a ton of space to move to, considering how those might jigsaw puzzle into what is a relatively small area in the downtown. There's also the tourist neighborhood developments going on, so there just doesn't seem to be a ton of space for that. It is a great building. It just is it major disrepair at this point. Carrying the $2.5 million mark is a lot though, and so I think preserving the roof and then working downwards seems wise.
Mr. Buckle?
So Jake, in terms of getting direction, are you looking at projects or are you looking at financial breakdown in terms of direction?
I think projects at this point, or things that we already know are on the table that we'd like to focus on that. And then I think from the financial breakdown, we have a finance committee meeting coming up. I'd like to share a little more detail about what we might be able to do. And also talk to Member David from the facilities committee about some thoughts that they have.
So you really don't need us to make a financial decision vote.
Not at the moment, but we will have to soon. I want a direction so I can build a plan so that I can then share.
So I would say simply from my point of view, what you suggested makes perfect sense. I mean, we need a roof for daily, we have to preserve an asset. Security is already in the process, we would be finishing a project. And everyone knows how I feel about Longley, I can't put enough investment in that place, so. I'm all set with what you suggested as the three pieces right there to accommodate the 1 million. You said it's about $1 million, so I could see those numbers kind of working, in that general direction. That's my opinion.
Ms. Hawkins?
So knowing what I've known from Finance Committee and LCIP and several long discussions with Sister Damon about the Dingley building, as much as I would love to say, yeah, let's fix it up and make it perfect, it's the situation it's in now, the size the building is, it's never gonna be what we need it to be for LPS administration. That's plain, simple, cut and dry. It's just not gonna happen. There's no way. So at some point, administration is going to need to move. That's not a question, that's a fact. Do I want to see the building torn down? Heck no. I would love to see it repaired and repurposed. And there are plenty of things at that site to be repurposed to very good effect for the school department and for the city. So I don't want to see it torn down by any means, but we need to keep the blinders off to options. I like your ideas, Jake. I'll be talking with the Finance Committee, and I look forward to seeing what come to us the 17th.
Ms. Willow?
So real estate is something that, I have a little bit of knowledge on, and I'm just looking at real estate, commercial real estate in Lewiston. There isn't a lot to choose from, exactly what Ms. Ray said, but I do think that we should be reaching out to a commercial or several commercial real estate agents in the area, talking to them about what potential buildings there could be, even if it's not listed yet, they might know people who might list it. So the commercial real estate agents in Lewiston know all of the owners of these buildings. This is what they do. So it doesn't make sense for us to not at least look at those options and bring back information for us. I don't think we should say no to the relocation, because I think that the space, like what they have said, is space isn't gonna get any bigger really unless we throw a bunch of money into it. So.
Mr. Boblut?
I agree with Ms. Hawkins and Mr. Damon. As much as we like the historical significance, it's downtown location, it's a money pit, and we're gonna just throw good money and never reach the needs that we have. I support exploring, looking at other places and options.
Mr. Pedros-Mullins?
I would point out that if this is a space concern, and I would say that that raises its own questions about sort of the what might be driving that, but there is extensive office space available for rent in downtown Lewiston. If we needed overflow offices nearby, it's not like we couldn't get some. And rather than build ourselves a new building, which again would have no students in it, we can just have overflow office space. That's not an unreasonable thing to do, and would be to the benefit of downtown, and would be to the district's benefit by allowing us to have Longley at a density that it can work. There are plenty of institutions that have a building, and then across the street there is a floor of another building that they're working with. So it's not. I wouldn't necessarily sign on for the idea that everything has to be in the same physical building for it to work.
Ms. Willow?
Well, I think that if we wanted to have people in separate buildings, we might as well just have them work remote, and not paying that extra space. But I don't think that's what we want. I think we want everybody in one space so that they can easily function. I don't know. I don't know that answer, but
I mean, I think there's some level of close working conditions that can exist between the proximate to each other. I don't think I'm opposed to what else might be nearby. There are some things that certainly fit in one space better with others. If we did kind of divide and conquer, I think it's worth doing.
That's right.
Does the state won't help with a building that does not function as a schoolhouse, right?
My understanding is some districts that have done some, I would say, creative projects, that when they've done new schools, they've been creative about administrative offices tied to the new building project, but not solely for a central office as a state project. We can explore other funding and looking for. I've not heard of stories or situations in which the state says this central office is on the list of rebuilds. It's all the schools, and that school list is long. People fight pretty hard to get on it. So I think that's an area probably not necessary.
Yeah, I just, again, like framing it in what the other needs of the city are going to be, and the fact that as master of the council, knowing that fire station, we're doing all the fire stations, my understanding, fire station, central, police department, yeah. That's what's happening with that. So, Bureau, but, it's- I'm believing that the city needs for any of this. Just as part of the conversation.
I don't know that I was thinking to build anything. I like Tiny's idea of talking to some commercial brokers to say, what's out there. If we don't know, we can't even take a step that way. And Karen and I have had discussions about, what can we lease? What could we buy if? And some of those things around spacing. I know my mind often goes to places that are kind of whatever hypotheticals, but when we talk about like a work around out of district placements and how we keep those kids local and work with other districts around that. Could the Dingley building be that space? So it was operable as a additional space for students, but then you have to have a second space. There's a lot of things to consider.
As part of framing this conversation, what space is available at Longley? I think I'm under the understanding that some of it's being used as storage. There is some school facility space there, but what is the totality of that building?
Yeah, good question. I think actually that the campus is busier than people might think. In the upstairs kind of back section, the figure 8 area, that's running adult ed programs all day and half the night. The bigger module structure towards the front near the road is being used for classroom spaces as connected to our alternative pathways, as well as that side of the building. If you're looking at the front, the right-hand side that goes up towards the gym, all of those classrooms are being used as part of the Next Step program. And the student spaces used the gym. The spaces we're looking at sprucing up a bit so we can put them back in service below that on the ground level with the bottom entry. It needs some things, but we have folks coming to do some of that work so we can make that usable for additional student space.
Thank you.
Mr. Driscoll.
I would say it's also not, it's not worth disregarding the idea of potentially exploring remote work options, just as a thing unrelated to the pandemic. There may be folks who that could attract them to work here, who otherwise we might not be able to get, or it just would work better, or for whatever reason. But it sounds like, the reality is that the Dingley building is small. It's small by a factor of 10%, not 50%. So a small reduction in the number of people who are working in that space, either because they're working now at a school, or they're working in an office space across the street, or they're working from their own homes, solves the space issue. And I think that there's a lot of compelling reasons to explore remote work for those who are interested in it, from environmental reasons to economic reasons to quality of life reasons. And it's not to say that every job can be done remotely, it can't. there are plenty of jobs that absolutely can. And that is potentially something that we can use to attract candidates when we can't move salary numbers, or when we're not willing to move salary numbers. It's just an idea, it's just something to think about, but I wouldn't necessarily rule out the possibility of solving the Dingley space issue by seeing if there's a chunk of administrators who can and would like to work from home.
One other thing, just because we're kind of on that conversation about space, the Jordan room and the Dingley room, there's two big conference-like rooms upstairs. We've got some temporary, like module-like workstations that we're putting in one of them. The other we're leaving still so we can have meetings, and the idea is that one day this group will go back to that space. But I do want to say out loud that if those modules that are pretty easily moved work, it's kind of a very dense product that has good dividers and whatnot. We may look at needing to occupy both of those spaces for staff, which would kind of default push us to having meetings, whether it's here or another location. If those spaces are being used just to house that.
From a historical standpoint too, back when Bill Webster was superintendent, facilities was looking for other spaces. We did investigate the Violations Bureau. That just was not space at all for what the student department was looking for. And for several, it just was not space. So this whole idea of, overcrowding and some of the challenges of England, not the facilities committee for the school department now for 15 years. And England has been a discussion point almost every one of those years. And just never come up with a route to find the money to do what needs to be done. And the space itself just doesn't lend itself to being expanded. Postage stamp sized lot with limited parking already. Trying to do anything architecturally that would just totally detract from what it is there. It's a huge challenge. So to me, as unfortunate as it is, I like Dingley. I think it's a very attractive building. But it's not really good space. It's not healthy space. And it is probably one of the most energy inefficient buildings that the school department has. That is just trying to fix that too, and by doing something with the ventilation. It's going to be hugely expensive. And we're just burning dollars every year on that. They have one of the windows, they have just any of the systems that's there. Obviously, this is bad as windows and some of the infrastructure that's in City Hall. I mean, we've got there are so many buildings, the older buildings, that as a community we have to look at realistically and say, how long do you continue to pour money? I'm not advocating that we should come out of City Hall, not in any way, shape, or form. They've done a lot of work to it. But some of these buildings, look around. There's the Wallace School. There's the one up on Ash Street, up on the top of the hill, which is Fry. The old high school. It's on
Jordan.
A lot of those buildings have been repurposed very nicely, and they are still there, and they're still part of the makeup of the city. And they still create the architectural integrity of what has been built here in the last 200 years. But they've been repurposed for something that's more appropriate use. And the same could happen with they did the Helios almost right across the street from the fire station. Did a really nice job of that. And that's so many of those buildings have had, but every one of those has been turned back to private hands, because private hands can raise the funds to do it and do it right.
Mr. Mearsclaw.
I just think that there is a fundamental value to having government buildings that have a connection to the community. I think that we do a great disservice when we abandon buildings, and the same conversation is going to happen with the county because of the county courthouse. But I just think that we do ourselves a disservice when everything becomes about, you know, what is the absolute cheapest option for government, without any recognition that we have, that there are other factors at play. And from the geographic location of a building, where Dingley is the only LPS presence really in the heart of downtown, to the sort of lost connection to the history of public education in Lewiston, where Dingley, I think, is the oldest LPS building at the moment. And you know, and so I mean, really, like, you know, there is a value to that, and you know, I mean, not to get overly romantic about it, but you know, I would think that, you know, if you put down to it, we'd probably be able to build a more energy efficient and affordable state capitol today, but that's not a reason to abandon the one that we have. I think that there's real meaningful value to a society in its physical history and its physical memory that can't just be tossed aside for convenience. And that's why I would really urge this committee, when it comes to Dingley, to exhaust all possible options for continuing to use it, for being good stewards of the building that we have received from stewards going back generations, and you know, just ensure that it can continue to be used in the way that it is.
Mr. Pop.
So Jake, one thing, you know, like looking at Dingley, just thinking of what other districts have done. And I think you loaded up in there. One thing that struck me the first time I ever went in there is everyone's there. And you know, with other districts, the three that stand out are facilities and technology usually are in the biggest facility in your district, you know, AKA the high school, or one of your newer facilities that have, you know, technology hookups and stuff like that. What does technology need to be in the administration building? They're more operational, so is facilities. So if you take them out of the equation and they were relocated, and then one thing that always struck me was ELL, with the degree of needing to be involved in the community and outreach. And I've even mentioned this before that, you know, I felt, you know, that's a unit that should be at the Longwood building, right there in the heart of the city, to service that population. And what could they do? Saying a negative way, I'm just saying logistics, right? Being there in that building, kind of a head scratch. So I think there's things to look at in the existing structure that will free up that Dingley space, that all of a sudden you don't need to have these cubicles, and you can actually build offices if that is the intention to go now, the road to go down. And I'm just throwing that out that, yes, in its existing form, Dingley is unacceptable. However, you know, let me give you an example. That corner conference room on the second floor, that should be our meeting place. I have no idea why we meet in a I don't even know what that room is, with the chamber, call it the committee chambers. But you know, that corner conference room is superb. I mean, it's well designed, big enough. You can actually fit more people in there. So it's just a thought. I just think that there's a lot in the building that's not being tabulated right, and maybe a relook that what should be a Dingley and what could be a Dingley, and what does that open up? Like, I went downstairs, you have a ton of supplies. That should be what do they call it? It's the buildings up on the side somewhere that should be, ours was on Industry Ave in Auburn, completely away from the administration at all, from the schools, and they need space to work and stuff. And for me, I look at Lewiston and I see a very fragmented, you've got one department split up in 7, 8 different areas as opposed to being able to work out of one comprehensive unit and move on. So the other part I was going to ask is I see it says here to receive with a potential, to receive and approve the reallocation of the CIP funds. So even if we don't specify something, do you need a vote tonight to release those funds?
Don't have to have a vote tonight. I just didn't know if there'd be strong consensus, fixed Dingley and a motion to just say, take those funds and do that, so that there could be a vote tonight. I don't have to have one tonight. We do have to, I think on the 17th, we would want to be having our ducks in a row so we can get to city in time for them to do their work.
This one.
Yeah, so we don't need to do anything tonight, but could we say, can you bring us some information back for the next meeting, and then we have a even further discussion of what we want, because it seems like a couple people, wanna keep the building. Some people want to look at other options, and without having all the information, we can't really decide. So I'd like to see that we get some real estate information and.
Oh, that was one thing. Well, next door, St. Joseph's Church. It's been sitting empty now for a while. That hasn't wrecked through the office building. Right now, it's not to say we're going to open a church, but I'm saying.
I think that's the time.
That's a good meeting.
One night out there.
Ms. Wright.
I think number one, those is helpful to say like more information, but I also want to think about this year's CIP and are there any projects from that we could use that unallocated funds for that are of high priority again. That's my first inaccurate off-topic point. I think lessening that burden would be wise.
And that is absolutely a possibility. We could lessen the current ask by doing things if authorized.
Especially with the timeline that's given, those projects have been stepped out, whereas these are, obviously, we all have a lot of different ideas about the future of Dingley, and maybe that warrants more time and conversation that can be afforded by this process.
Agenda item number 9, to receive and potentially vote on proposed alterations to the fiscal year 22 approved school committee budget. Superintendent Lang.
All right, so I shared in the packet, and I think as the time cycle of the budget has evolved, I was at a place where we were talking about the agenda that I just felt like I needed to make sure you had every piece of information in front of you that was appropriate for you to have in front of you. But what I hope you know is that this is by no effort to change what exists, but I just want to make sure you had all the information appropriate as it relates to the budget. So school committee has already adopted a proposed budget. And then, as time goes on, people have their opinions and some of them make them known. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with them. I'm just trying to be mindful of everything and make sure you have in front of you every opportunity to hear, but also to share your voice in the process. And so in the memo I had pitched, and I'll say it publicly that when I put this together, I shared it with a few people who I consider to be essential to our district. They weren't pleased with me, not pleased with me at all. And I was humbled by their response. And I also thought that there might be members of this committee who say, we've already voted on this, we know we want to move forward with. I just wanted it in front of you as a just in case, as we build the rules and we've gotten to the nitty gritty, what could be. And And so I put a few things in here. But one would be using more of the carryover funds, which would diminish that capacity. Now, when we start this process the 1st of March, it's really difficult to project the end of the year carryover that might be existing due to this year's fiscal cycle, what have you. I feel more confident in that number now. And the other one is to use additional relief funds, but I did write in here and I was specific that we right now are going to use roughly $3.5 million in relief funds to do next year. It's a massive carve out, but I wanted you to know that by rule, those funds exist. I also put in here that I am very, very concerned about that, but it is a possibility. And by taking a couple of steps to reduce, to use more of the carryover, and then also to look for other things that we could put into relief funds, we could have a discussion about those shifts and reductions that could reduce the local tax impact. And again, it leaves us in a desperate situation in years to come if people don't support increases. So this is it's a risk in one direction, but I want to provide you an opportunity to at least hear it and know that that information was available. That's the latest that we have. I do think if we did this, again, we'd have a lot of work ahead of us. But come July 1, if we get this approved, we could function because of the relief dollars that will flow in certain situations. My real fear is 2 years out.
Ms. Rick.
Spoke with the superintendent about this. I emailed him immediately when it came up because I was not one of the folks who was pleased with it. I want us to be able to focus on educating the learners in this district and making sure they're well after a year of traumatic events. And so I think the way we've set up the funding already does that. It's not a Cadillac budget. I want to reinforce how much I support the budget that we already passed. If folks want to send a message to the council for tomorrow night, we might want to take a vote on this and vote it down 0 to 9. That might send an important message, but at this point, I have no interest in this vote.
Mr. Pop.
Okay, clarification. When you say 3.5 million in COVID funds, what is the breakdown between the one-time spending and the reoccurring?
So to get to our latest target, I would say it was about half and half. What we moved was a lot of supplies, books, things of that nature that we think we can do that. Like the recurring costs, though, these are consumable items, but we think we can do our very best to preserve them so that it's not so painful after the fact. But they are recurring items that landed in that.
Your best guesstimate is around 1.7.
Yeah, I'd say it's about half. It's about half.
So I got 3 concerns with what you put forward. One, using more of the fund balance. I want a clarification on that because I made a motion 2 meetings ago that 120,000 of the carryover was going to be moved for the administrator for ELL.
That did happen.
And that would reduce the carryover over to 3.8. Where are we at? Hold on.
It would be the 120 under the budget.
Right, the 1.5 million, so it'd be like 1.3. So we wouldn't really be looking at $500,000. And the caution I would have there is we got too big of a cliff to handle. I mean, assuming we get 2 million each year, and we still got 4 million to make up, and we got to do this starting this year, or it's just a spelling disaster for what shaped the school department in the future financially. So I would say there's some room if those of us continuing on to next year are committed to make sure that that number increases from let's say 1 million. And that, I think doing the calculations, 1 million puts us all right spot, not a great spot. Knowing there's considerable discussion on the city council side, assuming that we may have a vote that we have to tackle. And certainly the lobbying the public has done to me this week. They've asked me to make the suggestion to reduce. That would be one area I would suggest. The second part is I'm done personally me on the COVID relief funds. We basically created a whole nother cliff besides trying to deal with the fund balance. Certainly everything in there is quality that's needed. And I think that we need to support that, but I can't go another 200. What I can do is the third piece is hearing from principals and administrators and teachers alike and other staff that our request for supplies was a little thick, that I'm hearing that we really didn't need to go to that level that we did because they're not really even sure how they're going to utilize all that in the coming year, and that's something that was broken down over a 2-year period to make more sense than everything all at once. So I'd like to make a motion that we reduce, we alter the fiscal 22 school committee budget, 300,000 taken out of the carryover fund balance, and an additional 100,000 straight cut out of the supply line, not throwing it into COVID funds. So reducing 400,000 more off of the request to the for the local allocation. And I believe that's going to amount to 20 cents in the mill rate. I think that's reasonable. Again, I think we could financially swing it, fund balance reluctantly, but assuming all the numbers are going to go the way they're going to go for the next year. And in fact, I think we overdid the supply piece. That's where my motivation. So I'll make that motion.
Second.
I'll make a long rah speech, but last week I said not voting for this budget is repulsive. My stance still stands, so I'll be voting no.
Mr. Jersey.
I'm strongly opposed to any changes to the budget that we passed unanimously. It's very hard to get this committee to agree 9-0 on much of anything of substance, and yet we went through a process and produced a 9-0 result, something we should all be very proud of. And frankly, I'm a little mystified why this is even in front of us, because this committee went through close to what, 6 weeks of budget deliberations and long nights and lots of wrangling and difficult decisions. And I mean, this is a fiscally irresponsible suggestion. This is a suggestion that does not reflect well on it. I mean, this is a suggestion that asks future committees to pay our tab. I mean, that's what this is saying that we're going to, suggest that if we want to educate students in Lewiston to the level that I think everyone in this committee does, and that we're just going to count on people down the line to pick up the bill so we can deliver an arbitrary reduction in the mill rate. This is and for no reason. This budget has unanimous support from this committee, and I look forward to it being passed tomorrow night by the council and then being passed next week by the voters. But I don't think that we should even vote on this. And if we do vote on it, I am strongly opposed to any effort to undercut funding for public education in Lewiston like this suggestion would do.
Just gonna say that I don't mind voting on it. I think we all worked really hard at this budget, and we support what we've voted on already. And if we want to vote this down, I'm okay with that. If it makes it better for city council, or if it doesn't even matter, we just move on. I don't care either way.
Ms. Hawkins.
So I'm gonna quote Jake here because he said it right. If we do not carry these items forward that occur on an annual basis, when our relief funds expire, we will not be able to operate schools in a way that supports our students. I don't think we need to be any clearer. I'm sorry if the city thinks we're asking for too much. He's got a line here about asking the community for a commitment over the next couple of years. We've already seen what that leads to. That leads to the city coming back to the saying, 10 cents, we don't care. I'm sorry, the joke about asking the state for another school, if that's not a joke, somebody needs some education. Because we know the list of people asking for the state for more schools. It's hard to get on there, and it's a long list already. I mean, what we came forward with is reasonable, it's responsible, and makes sense. A cut like this, it leaves too many vulnerabilities, too many ways for a what if to come through and wipe us out. And I can't agree to that.
Ms. Ray.
What Ms. Hawkins just said, just like hit home too, like the thing that was gonna wipe us out just hit, and how much federal relief did we need to float us through this past year? I'm sure, how much relief money did we get and expend already? At least 10 million, yes? Yeah, I mean, that's not happening again. I think we've run up that tab as much as possible, and thank goodness that, the federal government authorized that and allowed us to make the right decisions for our people. It's not gonna happen again, I don't think, and so preparing this community for excellent education for all kids is what this budget does. So again, I hope everyone feels that way still.
Mr. Physick.
Vote no.
Do we need to vote?
So there's no motion.
There's no
to
motion.
vote on currently. You can leave it as that, or you can choose to make a motion.
Good with moving on.
No need to talk about you.
Okay. Agenda item number 10, report from city council representative.
So we meet tomorrow night. There is some very routine stuff at the beginning of the meeting, but then we get into the very exciting parts of approving the CDBG and home budgets, the final public hearing for the municipal budget, the finance committee's recommendations on the proposed budget, using our unassigned fund balance for capital purchases and other one-time expenses, our nonprofit organization activities budget, our final adjustments to the municipal budget, making the appropriation for the municipal budget, and then item 11, approving the FY22 budget for the Lewiston School Department. And so the 101 is what is going to be voted on tomorrow night based on tonight's discussion. I hope you all might come and speak in favor of it as members of the public. That would be helpful for the council to hear. Other than that, I think that's it.
Just to clarify, is the meeting electronic only, or is it?
Yes, so members of the public can participate by visiting lewistonlane.gov/2021cc. Go to your own link and sign up for that, because if I shared my link with Paul, he'd show up as a second Alicia Wright, which would be a little weird. But if folks need phone access, they can contact the city at 207-513-3021 for the access code before 5 p.m. That part of the meeting is, there's a workshop at 6 p.m. about public restrooms. That's going to be 30 minutes, and then the regular meeting starts at 7. I'd say we'll probably get there. I don't know. There's a lot on here, maybe 7:30 or so, but if you just have it on the background starting at 7, you'll hear it's item number 11.
It's the public restroom thing about the homeless porta potties that were placed in the city, or?
So this is a new sort of initiative where it will be public restrooms. It's not just for the homeless population. There's been discussion about placing them within Kennedy Park, but some counselors are opposed to that placement, and so it's gonna be a more full discussion about where the appropriate place is. There is an allocation through fund balance to run that in the next year. And it would be a pretty permanent facility, that, you know, Public Works would probably have to take care of, and police would probably do a walk over by a few times a week. To ensure everyone's safe in there, but,
That's at what time?
so that is at 6 p.m. for that portion.
Oh, is that a workshop?
It's a
Oh,
workshop.
so it's not even public.
There will be
input.
there won't be opportunity. The mayor might allow opportunity for public comment if folks show up and raise their hands. I usually shove that out to them, but if you have comments, you can also email them
Email.
to publiccomment@lewistonmaine.gov. That's all
And
right
can
there.
we get that sent out before the meeting so that? they
You want me
can
to
be
send you
read?
that email address?
Yes, that'd be great.
Sure.
Are you all set, Ms. Rec?
I'm good.
All right. Agenda item number 11 is report from the school committee chair, and I do not have any updates to share tonight. Agenda item number 12, report from the superintendent.
Good. Shared a lot tonight. Okay, I've got it all up there.
Agenda item number 13, school committee community announcements.
If anybody works with a group that's doing good works in the downtown, Healthy Neighborhoods has opened our shared gifting grants. That opened up on the 29th. So go to grantfcc.com. Our website, the information is there about how to apply for the grant, what the theme is for this year. So we got what I got.
Can you send that to me? That's me. Sorry, that's not-
Agenda item number 14, future agenda items. Ms. Wright.
So I would love to have a discussion and a possible, and I can write this proposal, but there is an effort at the state level to reduce services or possibly close the facility at Long Creek. I think it's incredibly relevant to the work we just did on student expulsions and how we look at, our penal system within the school department. So I think we should at least have the discussion, if not the vote. I'm happy to put together some research on that. Thank you.
Mr. Madeira's comments.
I also think that's a great idea, and so when I support it coming forward quickly. I also would like the committee to consider ways that we can recognize LGBT Pride Month in June, and take a more active role in promoting equality regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, especially as we see both in Augusta and around the country the rights of trans students under attack. I think it's worth exploring ways that we can be visibly supportive of our LGBT student population.
Mr. Putnam.
So I'd like to get something on the agenda to talk about an item that sort of getting tossed around right now that is very pertinent to this district. And that is, I'd like to be able to separate the special education tuition, the outplacement, the $4.6 million that we spent to send our kids out of district, from the special ed discussion that will be coming up, I believe, at some point. We have irons in the fire right now in that I think there's some pretty good discussion on the superintendent's level where they recognize we're not alone. Auburn has the same situation, Poland, Turner, Sabatis, and surprisingly enough, even Oxford Hills region has the same situation. And they actually have an existing program that I had an opportunity to go talk to and see that allows potential for us to either take advantage of in its existing form, or for all of us to get together into one combined effort to take in all of our students who are outplaced at an extraordinary cost savings, where we're not sending out to private, but we're taking care of our public students together. And where this is a uniform issue that hits every single district in this area. There's a lot of potential there, and that they seemingly seem to be on board for the discussion. And even to the point of discussing, you know, the different type of formats that could be, whether it's Lewiston taking the lead, a regional unit, the county of Androscoggin, whoever could be the lead agency in that. So I think when you take a look at what Oxford Hills is saving for their internal program for each student, and then you multiply it by, we have what, 120 outplays? So, and you add another, Auburn was 50 something, and you add the other districts, all of a sudden you're talking about 200-300 students, and and we have a potential to, you know, provide quality service education right here locally as opposed to outplacing long distance, you know, transportation costs, so many things that apply to it. So I would really like the committee sort of the fast track this, because this is something being talked about now, and for the next budget, that you know, this is a potential. We all work together. We got something here that is beneficial in so many different ways. Not to mention the fact that when you educate in a public format as opposed to the private format, there is significant EPS funding that goes with that. So not only do we spend the money that we're spending, we're also losing money because we're sending to private. So this is a tremendous opportunity here with a lot of energy behind it. So I hope we could get that earlier than later.
Anything else? All right, agenda item number 15, enter into executive session to discuss a personnel matter in accordance with 1 MRSA 4056A. So moved. All right. 4, 2,
Yes.
3,
Yes.
4,
Yes.
5,
Yes.
6, 7,
Yes.
city council?
Yes.
Yes, Ward 1. We will now enter